I never liked the silence in the mornings, not in the deep woods, not when it was that particular kind of quiet, the one that doesn't feel like peace, but like something waiting, holding its breath. I was 34 years old when I started noticing that difference. Maybe it was the years of solo travel. Maybe it was the way the forest changed tone when you camp alone in a Volkswagen Westphalia instead of a modern RV. No walls, no noise insulation, just thin fiberglass between you and the wilderness. Either way, I learned to listen to the silence, because it almost always meant something was off. That was the fall I took 6 weeks off from my job in Oregon to do what I'd been dreaming of since I was a teenager. A solo camping tour through some of the lesser-known national parks in the Southwest and the Rockies. I wasn't chasing a bucket list. I was trying to outrun something, a grief that had no shape but sat heavy in my chest every night. My younger brother had died the winter before, not in some heroic or tragic way, just black ice on a road he knew too well, the kind of death that feels like a slap from God. No poetry, no sense. The trip wasn't supposed to be healing, it was just movement. Motion helps sometimes when nothing else does. I'd made it through Utah, spent nights parked beside ancient rock formations, wandered in and out of Moab, Bryce, and Arches. But it was in Wyoming, somewhere between Grand Teton and Shoshone, that the real story begins. I'd parked my Westphalia in an unofficial dispersed campsite off a narrow service road not marked on Google Maps. Just a pin dropped from a forum post on an old VW camping thread. It was remote, clean, quiet, no cell reception, just how I liked it. I set up late in the afternoon. The forest here wasn't dense, but it was eerie. Tall pines spaced out just enough to let in the last gray light of evening, but thick enough that you couldn't see more than 20 or 30 yards in any direction. The ground was soft, blanketed in years of fallen needles and old snowmelt. My boots barely made a sound. That night, I made a fire, cooked a tin of beans, and pulled out an old picture of my brother. I always brought it out on these trips, said a few words, drank half a beer, let the dark settle in like an old quilt. It was cold enough that I layered up before crawling into the van. I remember checking the rear view, more out of habit than anything. Pitch black, no headlights, no moon, just forest and darkness, and the creak of the wind through the trees. I woke up to a sound I couldn't place. Not a bear, not a person, not a coyote. Just movement, a soft, shuffling sound outside the van, maybe 10 feet away. It was steady. No breaks, like someone pacing, like footsteps in a circle. I froze. I lay still for maybe 10 minutes, just listening. My heart was beating in my throat, and I could feel my ears straining for every detail. The weird part was how light the steps sounded. Too light for a bear, but too slow and deliberate for a deer or elk. And then they stopped, just like that. Gone. I didn't open the door. I didn't move. I fell asleep again around dawn once the light began to rise, and when I finally climbed out of the van, everything looked normal. Nothing disturbed, nothing broken, the fire pit untouched, but then I looked at the ground. Footprints, a single trail of human footprints, barefoot. They led from the tree line to the van, then around it, once, twice, 3 times, and then they just stopped. No prints leading away, just vanished, mid-stride, 10 feet from the van. Now, I've camped enough to know how to read tracks. These weren't made by boots. They weren't distorted by rain or wind. They were fresh. I followed them back toward the trees, maybe 30 paces. Then they just ended in the middle of the clearing. No scuff marks, no turnaround, just there one moment and gone the next. I didn't stick around long after that. I packed the van and drove half awake through 2 hours of dirt road until I found a signal. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't even post about it in the forums. It felt wrong, like saying it out loud would make it more real. But that wasn't the last time I saw those footprints. Not by a long shot. 2 weeks later, I was camped outside Great Sand Dunes National Park in Colorado. Different terrain, different weather, still remote but warmer. I'd parked near Medano Creek, just outside the main campground in a sandy stretch that allowed overnight stays. There were 2 other vehicles within shouting distance, A couple in a Sprinter van and a solo hiker with a rooftop tent on a black Subaru. I went to bed early that night. I'd hiked the dunes all afternoon and was exhausted. But around midnight, I woke up again. Not from sound this time, but from cold. A deep, seeping cold. Now, keep in mind, it wasn't that cold when I'd gone to bed. Maybe high 40s. But when I woke up, it felt like the air had dropped to freezing inside the van. I could see my breath. The windows were fogged, but something about the way the condensation had gathered, it looked like patterns. Not random, almost like smudged fingerprints moving in a circle. My stomach dropped. I got out of the van, slowly. No flashlight, just the red glow of my headlamp. I scanned the sand around the van and saw them. Footprints, barefoot, human, encircling the van again, and this time there were two sets. One slightly larger, one small, maybe a child's. Again, they began about 20 feet from the van, circled it, then disappeared. The sand was untouched beyond that. No sign of entry, no drag marks, no scuffs from animals, just vanishing steps. I walked over to the Subaru, woke the guy up. He thought I was crazy at first, until I asked him if he'd heard anything. He rubbed his eyes, said, yeah, actually, he'd heard a woman humming around midnight, thought it was the couple in the Sprinter. But when he looked outside, no one was there, just shapes moving between the dunes. He didn't come back to sleep after that. Neither did I. By morning, both of us were ready to go. The couple in the Sprinter was gone before the sun came up. I didn't know what to make of it then. Still don't. But something was starting to connect, a pattern forming under the surface, different parks, same footprints, same disappearance. And that's when I started digging. The forums, old Reddit threads, deep internet stuff, not the surface level campfire stories, but real reports, the kind with photos, witness statements, the kind the rangers don't talk about. Turns out I wasn't the first. People had been reporting disappearing footprints in national parks for decades, in places as far apart as Olympic and Big Bend, Glacier and Shenandoah, always the same story. A single trail of footprints, barefoot, sometimes child-sized, leading in from nowhere, circling a camp, then ending abruptly, mid-stride. Some say it's wind, erosion, temperature shifts in the ground, but those of us who've seen it, we know better. We've stood in those woods, felt the weight of eyes that never blink, heard the sound of breathing that doesn't belong to anything alive. And once you see the prints, once you know they're out there, you start to realize the wilderness doesn't care what makes sense. It only cares that you listen. The thing about fear is it doesn't always hit you all at once. Sometimes it seeps in, quiet and patient. It creeps around your reason, settles into the back of your throat like a taste you can't swallow. That's what it felt like during the days that followed. I kept driving, kept moving. But something about me had changed. I wasn't just a guy on a healing trip anymore. I was watching the ground. Every campsite, every trailhead. Every time I stepped out of the van, my eyes were scanning for prints that didn't match my own. I thought about cutting the trip short, heading back west. But that would have felt like surrender, and maybe some small, stubborn part of me didn't want to give this thing that power. Or maybe I was obsessed. The way you get when you're too deep into something to back out clean. So I kept going. Headed east toward Nebraska. There's a little-known section of the Sandhills I'd read about years before. Nebraska National Forest. Not the first place you'd think to camp, but it has this strange, almost artificial stillness, like a place halfway between real wilderness and something man-made. I parked at the edge of a trail loop, backed the van up under a cluster of old ponderosa pines. The sun was just starting to fall behind the horizon, painting the sky in that heavy orange that only shows up in flat country. And for a while, everything felt fine. I made a fire, heated up a meal packet, put on some old blues through the van speakers, and watched the trees sway like they were half listening. The wind was gentler here, less like a threat, more like a whisper. But underneath it, I kept waiting for that shift, that drop in pressure, that bite of cold air. It didn't come that night, but something else did. Around 2:30 a.m., I was jolted awake by a rhythmic sound. Not footsteps this time. Knocking. 3 knocks. Then a pause. Then 3 more. Not frantic, not forceful. Measured, like someone knocking politely on a door they weren't sure they wanted opened. I froze. The sound was coming from the rear of the van. Driver's side. The window. I waited, holding my breath. 3 more knocks. I reached for my flashlight, clicked it on, and aimed it toward the window, but the condensation was too thick to see out. Just mist and darkness. My fingers hovered over the sliding door handle, but I didn't open it. Instead, I leaned forward and gently wiped a patch of glass with my sleeve. Nothing. No one there. I stepped outside, against all my better instincts. The air was colder than it should have been. My breath came out in plumes. And on the ground, there they were again. Footprints, not circling this time, just a single line, leading from the van straight toward the woods. Deep enough in the dirt to be fresh, crisp, not windblown. I followed them maybe 20 yards before they stopped. Same story. No return trail, no sign of turning, just ended in the middle of a clearing as if the person had sunk into the earth or been pulled straight up into the sky. But that night, there was one new detail. Between the last 2 prints, spaced about 2 feet apart, was something I hadn't seen before. A single feather. Jet black, almost blue in the light of my flashlight. I picked it up without thinking, and the moment I did, everything changed. A sound hit me. Sharp, low, guttural. Not from outside me, but inside, like a ringing deep in my ears. It only lasted a second. A flash of pressure, like diving underwater without warning. Then silence again. I dropped the feather and backed away, didn't sleep the rest of the night, just sat in the driver's seat, headlights pointed at the tree line, wondering if I was losing my mind. But I didn't leave. Not yet. The next morning, I spoke to a ranger. I didn't say anything about footprints or knocking, just asked if there had been any incidents out here, anything strange. He didn't blink. "There are stories," he said. That was all. But then, as I turned to walk away, he added, "You're not the first one to ask about footprints, just so you know." I didn't ask for more. I didn't want him to think I was unstable. But the way he said it, so flat, so practiced, like he'd said it before. That evening, I drove east again, took a long detour through Kansas, then dropped south into Oklahoma. I'd planned to spend a night at Chickasaw National Recreation Area, known for its springs, its trails, its serenity, but I never made it there. Because halfway through Oklahoma, I picked up a hitchhiker. I know. Dumb. Classic horror setup. But it wasn't like that. He was standing on the side of a state road near Sulphur. Older guy, mid-60s maybe, wearing worn jeans, flannel, boots caked with red mud, had a calm energy, said his name was Amos, told me he was trying to get to his brother's house 2 towns over. Van had broken down, no signal. I offered him a lift, and he didn't say much for the first 20 minutes. Just looked out the window, quiet. Then he asked, "You ever hear knocking late at night? Out where there's no one around?" I nearly swerved off the road. I didn't answer. He looked over at me, nodded slow. "Didn't think so. You got the look of someone who has." I pulled over. I didn't know why. Just something in my gut said I needed to talk to this man. We sat there, engine idling. He took a deep breath. "Saw prints back in '89, he said. "Arkansas, near the Ozarks. I was camping with my daughter. She was 6. First time I'd taken her out. Wanted her to learn how to be in the wild. Trust it." He paused. "They circled our tent twice. I checked in the morning, barefoot, one set. Then they vanished, like the ground had swallowed them." I asked what he did. "Didn't say a word," he replied. "Packed our gear and left. Never told her. She still thinks we had a great time." I asked if he'd seen them again. "Not in person," he said, "but I hear things from folks like you, folks who look haunted." He looked me straight in the eyes. "Whatever's out there, it ain't a man, and it ain't a ghost. It's something older, something that doesn't walk like we do." That line stuck with me. Doesn't walk like we do. Because that's exactly how it felt, like the footprints didn't follow the rules of gravity, of presence, of being. Amos never told me more than that. I dropped him off outside a little farmhouse on a gravel road. He thanked me. Said, "Keep your eyes open, and if you ever see more than 2 sets of prints..." He didn't finish that sentence. just closed the door and walked away. I slept with the van locked tight that night, every window covered, knife beside my pillow. But sleep didn't come, because now I wasn't just afraid of seeing the prints. I was afraid of who else might be seeing them, of what it meant that I was seeing them more often, of the growing thought I couldn't shake, that maybe they weren't following me. Maybe I was following them. I started testing little things after that, not big, dramatic experiments, just subtle observations. I began to mark the soil around my van at night. A line scratched into dirt, a ring of sticks, sometimes coins, sometimes salt. I don't know why, maybe just instinct or desperation. Part folklore, part survival. All I knew was that I didn't want to be caught off guard again. I kept moving, though, always moving, east through Arkansas, then into Tennessee, and every few days I'd find a place to camp that felt almost safe. Places I picked intuitively, off-grid forest roads, little patches of wilderness just past the trailheads where most hikers stop. But no matter how isolated I got, the footprints always found me. Always. Some nights, they came without warning. Other times, I could feel them building, the way the trees would hush as if the forest itself was hiding. The smell would change, like damp leaves and something metallic, something wrong. The silence wasn't the peaceful kind. It was like the woods were sucking in air and holding it. I'd learned to sit with that feeling, let it wrap around me like a pressure change before a storm. One night, just outside Cherokee National Forest, I heard it again. Not knocking this time, not humming, something else. Breathing, slow, wet, close, not from one direction, from all around. I'd parked on a slope, facing the edge of a creek, windows cracked half an inch for air. Around 3 a.m., I woke up with sweat on my neck, despite the cold. I could feel that something was near. Not a bear, not a person. It wasn't the fear of danger. It was the fear of recognition. Something knew I was there. I didn't move, didn't look, just listened. The breathing circled the van once, then twice, and then stopped right beside the driver's side door. My body was frozen stiff. I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my eardrums. Then came the sound, sharp and soft, like knuckles brushing against metal. Not a knock. A caress. That broke me. I reached for the key and turned the engine over with shaking hands. My headlights flared on, and for a split second, something tall moved in the edge of their reach. Not running, sliding, upright, gray and long. But I'll admit something to you now. I didn't chase it. I didn't film it. I didn't even try to remember its shape. I refused, because something in me knew whatever I was seeing wasn't meant to be remembered clearly. Memory would twist it, reality would dilute it, but fear would remain intact. I drove through the night until the gas gauge screamed at me, pulled off into a small town called Tellico Plains, slept in a church parking lot, windows sealed, knife in my lap, and in the morning, just like that, it was gone. The air was back to normal, no marks on the van, no footprints this time. But the fear didn't fade. It grew heavier, like something had marked me. I stopped telling people, even the online ones, because here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. Once you start seeing these things, the footprints, the patterns, they start seeing you back. And when that happens, nothing feels private anymore. Nothing feels safe. Weeks passed, and then near Shenandoah, I made a mistake. I camped too long in one place. It was a stretch of backcountry woods, deep, untamed. I'd been driving all day and found a clearing that felt calm. Birds were active, leaves still green even in October. It felt alive, friendly even, so I stayed longer than usual, 3 days. That was the mistake, because it let them find me. The first night was calm. The second I heard whispers, not voices, not words, just sounds that resembled language, like a dream trying to speak through fog. And the third night, the footprints didn't circle the van. They led away from it, a single barefoot trail stretching into the woods, as if inviting me. That's the part no one talks about. Not the fear of being watched, but the urge to follow. It was almost hypnotic. A slow pull in the chest like a rope tugging me from inside my ribs. I stood at the edge of the trail, flashlight in hand, like staring at that impossible line of prints. And for the first time, I took a step forward. then another. The woods were whispering all around me. Not leaves, voices. Low, almost kind, reassuring. I stepped again and again. I made it 20 feet in before I heard it. A snap behind me, I turned. Nothing. But when I looked back toward the trail, the prints were gone. Vanished. Erased from the earth in a breath, and the air turned colder than anything I've ever felt. That's when I knew whatever I'd followed wasn't leading me. It was luring me. I ran back to the van without thinking. Locked the doors. Engine on. As I peeled away, I looked in the rearview mirror. There was something standing in the tree line. Still. Human-shaped. But too thin. Too long, arms like shadows stretching into branches, and even from that distance, I swear I saw its head tilt the way dogs do when they're trying to learn a new word. I didn't stop driving for hours, didn't stop shaking for days, and that night, when I finally fell asleep in a rest stop off I-81, I dreamed of footprints, not on dirt this time, but on the ceiling of my van. Dozens of them, crisscrossing, hanging above me, as if something had walked upside down across the interior while I slept. When I woke up, there was dirt on the inside of the van door, a single smear, barefoot. And the worst part, I wasn't even surprised anymore. By the time I reached West Virginia, I had stopped pretending this was a vacation. I wasn't sightseeing anymore. I wasn't out there to heal, to reflect, to reconnect with nature. All of that had been stripped away, piece by piece, somewhere between the silent knocks and the shadow in the woods. What was left was something raw, something hungry. I was being hunted, but not by a creature, by a pattern. A design I couldn't see but could feel, the way you feel a stare without catching the eyes. It was late October when I camped in the Monongahela National Forest, Blackwater Falls area. I knew the spot because my brother and I had been there once years ago. We were kids, still dreaming about who we might become. He had chased frogs down by the river and laughed so hard he slipped on moss and landed right in the mud. I remember the sound of his laugh more than the fall. I should have taken that as a sign not to go back, but part of me needed to. I arrived around dusk, set up under a pine-covered ridge that overlooked a ravine. The light was already thinning, dripping gold through the needles. For a moment, I actually let myself believe the night might be different, that maybe whatever had followed me would skip this place out of mercy or memory. But the forest doesn't know mercy. By midnight, the knocking returned. This time, from the roof. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more. And then silence, so thick it felt physical, pressed against my ears like underwater pressure. I didn't move, just lay there in my sleeping bag, barely breathing. The van creaked, soft, metallic groans, the way it does when someone shifts their weight on the outside, and then came the breathing again. Only this time, it wasn't alone. 2 breaths, in rhythm, one fast, the other slower, deeper. I felt tears come up in my eyes without warning. Not fear, not grief. Recognition. The slower breath, it sounded like my brother. I don't mean that as a metaphor. I mean the rhythm, the tone, the way he used to breathe heavy when he was excited or scared. That exact sound. I sat up in the van and stared at the ceiling. I didn't say anything, but my hands were shaking. The knocks came again, right above my head. 3, pause, 3 more. Then something slid down the windshield. Not walked, slid, like water or a shadow. It moved too smoothly, too fast. I caught just the hint of shape, not a face, not a figure. Just weight, a distortion in the glass like heat shimmer, but black. And then, on the outside of the driver's side window, a handprint appeared in the condensation. Small, child-sized, 5 perfect fingers. Then a second handprint appeared beside it. Larger. Adult. Both stayed for exactly 7 seconds before vanishing. Not wiped away, but evaporated like steam. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even lie down. I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles, headlights pointed into nothing. I left before sunrise, and when I reached the ranger station at the park's edge, I went inside looking for anyone, anything that could give me a reason to keep going. Some rope to hold on to, some map to make this thing make sense. The ranger on duty was young, too young to know the look I wore. But when I started talking haltingly carefully, avoiding specifics, he leaned forward and said, "You ever read about the crawler stories?" I shook my head. He said, "A lot of folks say they're cryptids, forest beings, shapeshifters, but others say they're echoes." "Echoes of what?" I asked. He shrugged. "Grief, guilt, time. They say national parks are where thin places bleed. You know what that means?" I nodded, slowly. I'd heard the phrase before. Thin places, where the world we know is worn thin enough to see something else through. He looked me dead in the eye. "They don't leave footprints because they never really arrived." I left without thanking him, because that sentence rattled in my head for days. They don't leave footprints because they never really arrived. But that wasn't true, because someone was leaving footprints. Again and again, circling my van, standing by my window, luring me into the woods, someone or something was here. And deep down, I was beginning to understand something awful. These things, they weren't haunting the parks. They were the parks. They lived in the stillness, in the cold pockets of air, in the spaces where sound refuses to echo, where birds won't sing, where your compass spins for no reason. They weren't visitors. I was. And I'd stayed too long. By the time I reached North Carolina, I was done pretending this could be outrun. I parked in Pisgah Forest, an old logging road. Final stop. I'd stopped contacting friends, stopped updating the forums. I didn't want help. I wanted answers. That night, I did something reckless. I invited it in. I stepped out of the van before midnight, laid down in the dirt, shirtless, unarmed, let the air touch my skin, let the silence swallow me whole. And then I whispered, "Show me." Not a challenge, not a threat, just a surrender. I waited and waited. Then the wind stopped. Dead still. No sound. And in the tree line, something moved. Tall, thin, pale, like ash left in a fire pit. It didn't walk, it glided. And when it reached the circle I'd drawn in the dirt, it left no footprints. But it looked at me. Not with eyes, it didn't have any. Just a face like melting wax. Blank, changing. And in that blankness, I saw his face, my brother's, just for a second, then my father's, then my own, and that's when I understood. This thing didn't want to hurt me. It wanted to become me, to wear me like memory wears a body, not real, but close enough to haunt. I ran like I was on fire, slammed the van door shut and drove with headlights off for miles. Didn't stop until I reached a Motel 6 outside Asheville. First time I slept indoors in weeks. I didn't shower, didn't eat. Just collapsed on a stiff mattress and let the world fall away. The next morning, I went out to check the van, and there, on the windshield, in the middle of the morning dew, was a single perfect barefoot print, facing inward. I didn't touch the windshield. I didn't wipe it off. I just stood there in the motel parking lot, staring at that barefoot print. Right foot, average size, no mud, no dirt, just a perfect outline in the dew, formed like condensation, had avoided that one spot. It was facing inward, toward the van, toward where I had slept, or should have slept. That's when I realized something I hadn't dared think before. What if I hadn't been alone in the van that night? I walked away, left the van right there and wandered inside the lobby, got myself a cup of stale coffee and sat near the window like I was some drifter watching for a ghost to come down the sidewalk. Because something had shifted, and I could feel it. The rules, if there ever were any, didn't apply anymore. That print wasn't from outside, it was a signature. And something in me knew I had only one direction left to go, south. I looked at a map and my eyes locked on one place, Okefenokee Swamp, Georgia. Deep, ancient, humid. A place where the water doesn't reflect the sky, it swallows it. The kind of place that doesn't care about time, names, or warnings. A place so wild it doesn't even pretend to welcome you. And yet, I went. I drove the whole way in a fog, barely stopped for gas, ate crackers, slept for 10 minutes at a time at red lights. The van groaned like it knew this was our last stretch. Every mile deeper into Georgia felt heavier, like I was descending, not driving. By the time I reached the edge of the swamp, the air had changed completely. Hot, wet, still. The trees were different here. Spanish moss hung like curtains of hair from twisted branches. The water glistened like oil, and everything felt closer. The sky, the dark, the things you can't name. There was a small camping area, more like a ranger post than a real site. I parked behind the building. No one else was around. Just one canoe tied to a pole, bobbing gently in the dark water, and not a single bird singing. I climbed in back and lay down. No phone, no flashlight, just me, just the dark. I thought I'd sleep, but the swamp had other ideas. It began with the sound of water, dripping, not from rain, but from inside the van. I turned slowly toward the passenger side. A puddle was forming on the rubber mat near the door. I leaned in closer. That's when I saw them. 2 wet footprints on the inside floorboard. They led nowhere. Just sat there, pressed into the mat, as if someone had climbed in soaking wet and then disappeared. I couldn't breathe. The air felt thick, like trying to inhale syrup. I opened the sliding door with a jolt and stumbled outside as if barefoot on the soft, humid earth, and then I heard it. Splash! Out in the water, I turned. The canoe was gone, just the rope swinging loose. But there, way out in the shadowed center of the black water, a shape moved, something tall, thin, upright, standing in the canoe, staring back. I don't know how I saw its face from that far, but I did. It had my face, mouth open just slightly, like it was waiting to speak, but it never did. It just lifted its hand, slow and graceful, and that broke something in me. I collapsed to my knees, because this wasn't fear anymore. It was recognition. This thing had studied me, worn my thoughts, lived in the back seat of my mind for hundreds of miles. It had watched me cry, scream, rage, break, and now it knew how to be me. That's the thing about the disappearing footprints. It's not the vanishing that matters. It's the moments between, those exact seconds where the footprints stop. Like someone left this world mid-step. That's where it enters. That's where it learns. The vanishing is just a doorway, and I had walked through it without knowing. By the time I got back inside the van, I could feel it behind me, not breathing down my neck, just present, like a shadow I'd grown used to. I turned on the van and left the swamp behind, but I didn't feel any safer, not because it was following me, but because I didn't know anymore if it had ever left. You ever hear of the phenomenon called borrowed memory? Some researchers say traumatic experiences can project themselves, that people close to death sometimes share a vision, a flicker of someone else's life, a residue of something they were never supposed to touch. Well, this thing, whatever it is, it doesn't borrow memories. It feeds on them. And I'd given it everything. My brother, my grief, my fear, my breath in the cold silence, all of it. I had nothing left to offer. But the thing is, I don't think it wanted anything more. I think it was done with me. And that's when the real dread set in. Because if it was finished with me, if I had served my purpose, then it meant it was moving on to someone else. Someone who hadn't seen the prints yet. Someone still naive enough to think the knocking is just branches, that the cold is just weather, that the bare footprints in the snow are just a child playing near camp. They're not. They never were. They are the beginning. I tried to warn someone once. A guy I met at a trailhead in northern Alabama, Bankhead National Forest. He had that same energy I used to have. Curious, open, a little too relaxed for how far out we were. His name was Travis, mid-20s, drove a bright orange VW Eurovan, said he was making a video series about forgotten wild places. He smiled a lot, had a little drone he kept in a foam case, told me the birds out here seemed quieter than in other forests, like they were listening instead of singing. That should have been a clue. He felt it, even if he didn't know he felt it. I wanted to tell him everything, wanted to look him in the eye and say, don't stay here, not this deep, not with that kind of attention. But I didn't. Because part of me knew it was already too late. He offered me a beer. We talked about our vans, our routes. I asked where he'd stayed last night. He pointed down a dirt road, found a perfect clearing, had a fire and everything. But this morning there were these weird smudges on my windshield, like oily handprints. I figured it was pollen or something. I didn't answer. Didn't have to, because his eyes shifted when he said it. like his mind was protecting him from a thought he wasn't ready to think. That's how it starts, the rationalizations, the maybe it was nothing moments. It doesn't force its way into your life. It waits for you to invite it. I left Travis with a vague warning, told him I had to move on, that there were places I needed to get to before winter. He nodded, distracted, said he was planning to hike a trail that led through an old fire road. No one goes out that far, he smiled. I know, that was the last time I saw him. 2 weeks later, I searched his name, found his YouTube channel. It hadn't updated, but the last video he posted from that same forest had one single comment, just a dot. No name, no reply. That comment has been deleted since, but I remember because I clicked on the dot and it linked to a blank account. With one uploaded video, 6 seconds long, no title, no description, just a recording of footprints in mud, barefoot. Trailing into a stream, no return prints, no voices, no wind, just the sound of water and a low, distant breath, like something massive was exhaling beneath the earth. I never checked that channel again. I couldn't, because I already knew what I'd see if I kept looking. Another face, another version of what I used to be, and maybe another glimpse of what I was turning into. That's the thing about the prints. You start thinking they're outside of you, but they're not. They're impressions of what you were, what you carry, what you could become. They walk around your van because they're tracing the edge of your denial. They stop mid-stride because that's where your sanity halts. And if you're not careful, if you stay in one place too long or listen too closely, you'll leave prints of your own. Not from your feet, from your thoughts. I stopped camping after that. I slept in Walmart parking lots, lit up gas stations, Denny's booths with my arms folded over my backpack, anywhere with noise, with light, with people breathing nearby. I didn't care about wilderness anymore. I didn't care about healing. I just didn't want to feel alone. But even then, the silence found me. Not in sound, in absence, the flickering light that never goes out. The bathroom door in the truck stop that's locked even though no one's inside. The way condensation forms on a rear window facing a wall. Things started following me into cities. Not footprints. Not exactly. But reminders. A handprint on the inside of a rental car. A smudge on a motel mirror that looked like a child's open mouth. A voicemail on my phone with 6 seconds of breathing, slow, too slow for human lungs. I stopped using my phone for weeks. Turned off location sharing. I started to wonder if it mattered anymore. Because the truth is, whatever it is, it doesn't need to chase you. It just waits for the moment you remember it. It waits for you to look back. And we always do. We tell ourselves we're strong, rational, that the world can be cataloged and measured, but then we see a print where none should be, in snow, in sand, in condensation on the inside of locked glass, and we feel something ancient wake up inside us. Something with no name. Something that doesn't knock to be let in. It knocks to remind you that the door was never closed. So now I'm telling this story, not because I think I'll stop it, not because I think it's gone, but because someone out there, maybe you, will pull into a dark campsite one night, somewhere quiet, somewhere beautiful, and you'll fall asleep thinking about how lucky you are to be out there under the stars, and then you'll wake up, and the silence will be too thick, and the air will be too still, and you'll see the prince, bare, human, silent, walking toward your van, then circling, then stopping, and you'll feel your mind do what all of ours does, start building walls, rationalizing, protecting, but it won't work, not if you've already heard this story, because once you know the truth, you leave footprints of your own. I tried to run from it, really run. Took the van up the coast through urban sprawl and coastal highways, past lights so bright they left burns in my eyes. I thought maybe in the artificial, the buzzing, blinking, humming chaos of people, maybe there was safety. Maybe it only lived in the wild. But it's not the woods that make it strong. It's isolation. And you can be just as alone in a crowd as you can in the middle of the Rockies. One night, parked behind a seafood joint in Oregon, tucked between delivery trucks and overflowing dumpsters, I saw it again. This time, not prints, not smudges, not breath, a person. Except they weren't a person. They were me, or something that looked like me, just too still, too exact. Like someone had studied me in the dark for so long that they could wear me like a coat. I watched myself walk behind the van, not looking in, just circling. And then, just like that, gone. I got out, weapon in hand, screaming, searching, nothing, no signs. But the next morning on the ground in the dirt where I'd parked, 2 new sets of footprints, one of them mine. I checked, shoes, stride, same as I'd made coming out. But the other pair, they were barefoot and walking right beside me, step for step, like a mirror image following just out of reach. I can't explain the way that shattered me. I'd been scared before, paranoid, shaken. But this felt like violation. Like something had crawled so deep into my psyche it could walk in sync with me and I hadn't noticed. The dual prints disappeared into the gravel, not toward the woods, not toward the road, just gone. And I realized it wasn't about where I was anymore. It was about when I noticed. Every moment I denied it power, it waited. Patient, silent. Every moment I acknowledged it, even by accident, it learned. Took more. The disappearing footprints, they weren't clues. They were the recording of a possession in progress, a quiet, deliberate copying, a molding. I started testing it, leaving flour on the van floor, sleeping with a trail of salt around the doors, lining the windows with tape to detect movement. It didn't matter. The signs always came after, like it knew how to sidestep human perception, like it only needed me to blink, or sleep, or look the wrong way for 1 second too long, and then something new happened. I started dreaming of places I'd never been, campgrounds I didn't recognize, faces I couldn't name, whole nights I didn't remember living. Until one day I woke up and realized those weren't dreams, they were memories. But they weren't mine, they were its. I was remembering where it had been, or worse, where it was going. That's when I started seeing the news reports. Park rangers finding abandoned campsites with coffee still warm on the fire. Hikers gone missing with no signs of struggle, just half a footprint near the riverbank. Kids playing hide and seek who were never found, only for their shoes to be discovered in trees, paired neatly as if returned by hand. One story chilled me more than the rest. A couple camping in Shenandoah. Both experienced hikers. They vanished over the course of a single night. The only thing found at their campsite? 2 folding chairs, facing the fire. And on one of the chairs, condensation. A perfect bare footprint on the seat facing the other chair. That's not a monster. That's not a ghost. That's a mockery. That's a thing that watched 2 people enjoy something human and decided to become it or erase it. And you know what no one ever talks about? It's always the bare footprints. No boots, no gear. Because it doesn't need anything from us but impression. It wants to know how we walk, where we stand, when we hesitate. Because those moments, those tiny human hesitations, are its open doors. You stop to listen, it steps closer. You doubt what you saw, it smiles. You try to forget, it moves in. And once it's worn you long enough, once your breath becomes its breath, it leaves the prints for someone else to find. It becomes a whisper trail through the wilderness, a rumor passed in campfire conversations, a moment of cold that shouldn't be there, a shadow that doesn't belong to anyone present. Until finally someone says, "That's weird. It was snowing last night, but there's only 1 set of footprints around the van," and the cycle starts again. There is no scream in this story, no final battle, no triumphant escape, because what I lost wasn't a fight. It was a boundary between what I am and what watches me. I still have the van. It still runs, sort of, but I don't camp anymore. Not in the woods, not even in parking lots. I drive. I move. I stay where the air feels busy and the silence is full of lives besides mine. But now and then, even in cities, I'll come back to the van and find the same thing. A print, sometimes on the back glass, sometimes in the dust on the dashboard. Once on my own pillow, facing inward, always inward. Because it doesn't look at the world, it looks through you into something deeper, something it's still trying to shape. I don't tell this story to scare you. Not really. Fear's easy, cheap. You can find 1,000 tales online about things that go bump in the dark, monsters with names, ghosts with reasons. This isn't that. This is subtle. It wears patience like a second skin. It doesn't hunt you. It waits for you to forget what you are. And then it finishes the job. I know people who claim it's a spirit, a glitch. Some people online think it's an old government experiment, a test subject left to rot in the woods until it found a way out. Others say it's tied to ley lines or native burial grounds or alien mimicry. You hear it all when you go looking. But the more I lived with it, the more I stopped believing it was from somewhere. Because it doesn't arrive, it awakens, and it does so in the space we never guard, the space between knowing and refusing to know. I think it's been part of the land since before we named it, not a being, not a shape, a reaction to us, to what we leave behind. Footprints, and not just the kind in dirt, footprints in memory, footprints in grief, footprints in the way we speak into silence and hope nothing speaks back. The stories I've heard since mine, they're all the same underneath. Not in the details, in the pattern. Someone camps where they shouldn't or stays longer than they planned. They think they're alone. They want to be alone. That's the first mistake. Then they see the prints. Maybe just one. Maybe a whole circle. Sometimes barefoot, sometimes split-toed, sometimes impossibly long. They brush it off, because of course they do. The mind hates holes. It'll plaster over anything with enough denial until it can't anymore, because the next night the prints come back. Only now they're not just outside. They're on the floor mat inside the van, or on the icebox, or in the condensation on the ceiling. Some part of the camper breaks, then emotionally, I mean. And that crack is the invitation. From there, the world gets porous. You hear your name whispered from deep brush, though no one else is there. Your camera turns on in the middle of the night and films nothing but fog. You find drawings you didn't make in your journal. You start to feel observed even in daylight, and not in the classic spooky sense. In the sense that something has decided you are worth copying. That's when the van doors stop locking properly. That's when the dog won't enter the vehicle. That's when you're seeing flashes of yourself, just slightly off, in reflections, in shadows, in dreams. By then, it's already learning to walk like you. And all that remains is what it chooses to do with what it becomes. That's what no one talks about. We fear being chased, haunted, consumed. But this thing, it doesn't consume you. It replaces you, quietly, one behavior at a time, until one day, you're the print that doesn't match your own stride. Until one day you catch your own voice recorded at night, speaking in a language you shouldn't know. Until one day, someone meets you on the road and says, "Hey, weren't you the guy I saw at Yosemite 2 weeks ago? And you've never been to Yosemite, and you never told them your name." That's when it's over. That's when you realize it's not a thing out there. It's a mirror, one that can step out of the glass, and your choices, your fears, your trauma, your need for solitude, you made it possible. We walk into the wilderness thinking we're escaping something, but the wilderness doesn't erase us. It amplifies what we brought in. And if what you carry is hollow or broken or unfinished, it echoes and something answers. That's the real horror, not the print itself, but that we were the mold all along. So now I keep driving. The van still rattles, still leaks oil, still creaks when I take hard corners, but I keep it moving, always moving. I stop only when I must. I eat fast, I sleep light, I don't stay anywhere longer than a day. Sometimes I pass a national park and think about pulling in. Sometimes I don't even notice until I'm halfway through it, and my breath shortens and the shadows on the hills start to tilt just a little wrong. And I keep moving, because I know that out there, or maybe in here, it's still watching, not angry, not hungry, just waiting for the next set of prints to follow. And maybe one night you'll be the one parked deep in a thicket, fire burning low, marshmallows softening on a stick, radio humming a song from your childhood, and you'll hear something, not a roar, not a scream, just the sound of soft, wet earth giving way. And you'll look out and you'll see them. footprints, bare, leading from the edge of the woods toward your van, and you'll count them, 1, 2, 3, and then you'll stop counting because they don't stop coming. And that's when you'll understand what I'm trying to tell you. They're not just following you. They're becoming you. And the only question left is, when you leave in the morning, will it be you behind the wheel or something that wears your face, walks in your stride, and never once looks back? I remember the first time I heard the desert speak, not with words, not with anything you'd ever hear on a map or brochure, but with that deep silence, so thick and stretched it almost bends your ears. It was the kind of silence that fills your chest and makes your bones feel like they're humming. I was camped alone in the Mojave, and I remember thinking, this place isn't just empty, it's waiting. My name's Carter. I was 39 that year, divorced, tired, and trying to find whatever version of peace you can scrape up on 4 wheels and a modest monthly pension. I'd bought my rig secondhand in San Bernardino, a beat-up 2006 Coachman Freelander with more rust than style, and I told myself I'd spend a few weeks driving until the road felt quiet enough for my thoughts to catch up. That's what I told my brother anyway. But the truth is, I was running from something I couldn't name. I just knew the nights felt too long back in town, and I needed the kind of solitude you can only earn in the dead center of nowhere. And the Mojave, it's the closest thing we've got to the moon. I'd picked a spot down a dusty spur off Kelbaker Road, maybe 2.5 hours outside Barstow. No real campgrounds, just BLM land, wide open and mostly forgotten. The ground was flat, dry, and looked like it hadn't seen a footprint in weeks. No cell signal, no chatter, just the distant whisper of wind through creosote and the occasional howl that made me wonder if coyotes ever grieve their dead. I parked under the sun and listened to it bake the metal of my hood. It started out peaceful. I made coffee in the mornings, read Steinbeck in the afternoons. There were no bugs, no neighbors. It was clean silence. But then, little things began to shift. It was around my 3rd night out there when I first noticed the footprints. They were right behind my rig, clear as anything, human, bare feet too. And I mean bare. You could see the curve of the heel, the arch, even the faint marks where toes had pressed into the gritty sand. They trailed off behind my rig in a staggered line, maybe 20 paces long. And then, nothing. They just stopped. Like whoever left them had suddenly vanished mid-step. I stood there for a long time, staring at that last print. At first, I chalked it up to something innocent, maybe a hiker I hadn't noticed passing by in the night. But the thing is, those prints weren't there the night before. And they didn't go anywhere. No return trail, no vehicle marks, just 20 slow, deliberate barefoot steps, and then air. I checked my rig for signs of entry, locked tight. Everything inside was where I left it. I even counted the water bottles in my fridge to make sure nothing had been touched. It didn't make sense, but I told myself maybe I'd missed them before. Maybe I'd just parked over someone else's tracks. I wanted to believe that. But something in me tightened like an old tendon remembering a wound. That night, I didn't light a fire. I sat in the dark and watched the desert from behind my screen door, wondering what else might be watching back. The next morning, the prints were gone. I don't mean they faded. I mean gone. The wind had been calm all night. No dust storm, no rain. But where those clear imprints had been, the sand now lay untouched, as smooth as if someone had raked it clean. And then came the sound. That afternoon, while hiking up a nearby ridge to get a better view, I started hearing this. Tapping. It was soft, rhythmic, like a single knuckle knocking against metal, slow and methodical. I thought it might be my water jug shifting in the rig, but it followed me up the trail. Echoed once, twice, then stopped. I turned and looked behind me. Nothing. Just open desert and the heat haze curling over the scrub. The tapping didn't return that day, but something else did. That night I found new prints. Same feet, same size, but this time they started at the front of my rig. They walked straight toward the side door and stopped again, just like before. just stopped. No trail leading away. Just the faint suggestion of weight, a body that should have been there but wasn't. And again, barefoot. I took out my flashlight and swept the area in a wide arc. My heart was thudding, but I didn't want to spook myself. Maybe someone was playing a joke. Maybe I'd run into some drifter with a sense of humor. But there was no laughter in this place. No sign of anyone nearby. Just the cold gleam of the moon rising over dead stone and dry shrubs. When I got back into the rig, I locked every door, closed the blinds, sat in the driver's seat with a kitchen knife in my lap, the kind with the plastic handle that always comes loose if you twist too hard. I told myself I'd drive out in the morning, head north to the mountains. I wasn't cut out for this kind of solitude anymore, but I didn't leave. In the morning, the prints were gone again, erased like they'd never been there. And here's the thing. I should have trusted my fear, should have listened to that quiet voice in the back of my mind that told me this wasn't a joke. But I was too proud, too determined to prove I could still handle myself, even out here. And besides, the desert has a way of getting inside you. Once it does, you start making excuses for it. You start believing it's normal to be watched by something you can't name. By the fifth night, the tapping came back. Only this time it wasn't far off. It was on the rig. 3 short knocks, then a pause, then 2 more. I froze in bed, the covers pulled to my chest. I didn't even breathe. The knocks came from the back, just above the spare tire. Not hard, not frantic, just deliberate. I slid out of bed, barefoot, heart pounding. My fingers found the flashlight. I stepped to the rear window and lifted the edge of the blind, just enough to peek out. Nothing. But I didn't sleep that night. Not a second. By morning, my mental state had shifted. I wasn't just nervous, I was starting to feel monitored. Like the desert wasn't just observing me, it was responding to me. So I did what any reasonable man might do after a week of slowly building paranoia. I moved camp. About 6 miles east, near an old dry lake bed where the dirt turned white and cracked like bones in a shallow grave. I told myself the old spot was cursed, that moving would fix it, that whatever it was, I could outrun it. I was wrong. I drove until the sun dipped low and the whole desert turned the color of rusted copper. The new spot looked the same as the last. Miles of nothing, a few scattered boulders, some half-dead Joshua trees leaning like old drunks. But it felt different at first. Less pressed in, like the sky breathed easier here. I parked near the lake bed, leveled the rig, and took a walk. The cracked ground beneath my boots gave with a hollow sound, like stepping on brittle skin. I thought maybe the old stories about this place, the ones the locals muttered about cursed ground and lost miners, were just that, stories. Dust and heat can twist any tale into something mythic. But deep down, I knew better. Because that first night, before I even finished dinner, I saw the figure. It was standing still, far across the lake bed, just beyond the reach of my lantern light. I noticed it while chewing cold beans out of a can, watching the horizon like I'd done every night before. It was human-shaped, not moving, no flashlight, no campfire, just a silhouette and a sense. You ever feel your heartbeat slow not from calm, but from a kind of evolutionary recoil? Like your body's trying to go silent, so whatever's out there won't notice it? That's what happened. I turned off my lantern. The desert swallowed the light. When I looked again, the figure was gone. I waited a long time before going back inside the rig. I didn't sleep, just laid there listening. That kind of silence isn't empty. It has layers. You start hearing the blood in your ears, the creak of your own bones, the distant tick of something you can't name. Around 2:30 a.m., I heard the soft thump of something landing on the roof. Not walking. Not pacing. Just a single, quiet drop, like something lowering itself gently. I gripped the handle of that same kitchen and held my breath, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I stayed that way for almost an hour, afraid that any movement might cause, whatever it was, to move too. Eventually, the sun came up. When it did, I climbed out and circled the rig. Nothing. No footprints. No marks. No scratches. no dust disturbed, but I knew something had been there. I didn't make coffee that morning. My stomach wasn't having it. I started the engine and sat behind the wheel, gripping it, knuckles white, staring out at the empty flatland ahead of me. And then I noticed it. On the passenger window, barely visible in the morning glare, was a faint, greasy smear. A shape. A handprint. Too high for a child, too long-fingered for anything I've ever seen in nature. No ridges, no lines, just a slick shadow of something that shouldn't have been able to reach that high unless it had climbed. I wiped it with my sleeve. It smeared, but didn't vanish. You ever try to run from something that isn't chasing you in the traditional sense? That was me. I didn't wait another hour. I fired up the rig and drove south without a plan. Just movement, as if I could outrun the unknown. I ended up near an old gravel pull-off along Interstate 40. Not a real site, just a strip of land with tire marks and old beer cans from years past. But I stopped there. I needed somewhere that wasn't 6 miles from vanishing footprints and rooftop whispers. That evening, I kept the lights off and sat in silence. No books. No radio. I just watched the desert darken, and that's when I heard the knocking again. Only this time, it wasn't outside. It came from inside the RV, from the bathroom door. 3 knocks, precise, unhurried. The kind of knock you'd make if you were trying not to be threatening, but still make sure you were heard. I didn't move at first. I couldn't. I just stared at the closed door, lit faintly by moonlight through the cracked blinds. Another knock. The air inside the rig felt thick, like the pressure had changed, like the walls were holding their breath. I stepped forward, knife in hand, one slow step at a time, and when I opened the bathroom door, there was nothing there. No one. No thing. Just the tiny space I'd used to shave the day before, the toothbrush still in the sink, the little mirror reflecting a version of myself I barely recognized anymore. But on the floor, barely visible in the dust near the sink, were 3 faint footprints. Barefoot. Wet. As if someone had stepped inside just moments before. I backed out, closed the door, and locked it from the outside. I knew how stupid that was. Knew it wouldn't matter if something could vanish footprints and climb silently onto rooftops, but it made me feel better, made me feel like I was doing something. That night, I didn't sleep, and sometime around 3 a.m., I heard it again. Not a knock this time, but a voice. Soft, feminine, just one word breathed out like a sigh, closer. My heart stopped cold. I didn't imagine that. I know I didn't imagine that. It came from underneath the rig. I sat there in the driver's seat until morning, engine idling, doors locked, lights off, and when dawn broke, I drove again. Anywhere. Nowhere. I couldn't keep doing this, but I didn't know how to stop. It wasn't just about fear anymore. It was about what the desert was doing to me. How it unraveled things. How it slipped into my mind like sand through a cracked window seal, slowly filling up the corners I thought were sealed off. You want to know what madness tastes like? It's not screaming or sobbing. It's silence. Long, sunlit silences where your thoughts echo back at you and you can't tell if what you're remembering is real. I pulled into a rundown gas station somewhere near Amboy. Place looked like it hadn't sold gas since '96. But the pump still creaked when I leaned on it. There was an old man inside the shop, leathery and quiet, with eyes that had seen too many things and lips that had forgotten how to talk about them. I asked him if he knew anything about people disappearing out here, about footprints that led nowhere. He didn't answer at first. Then he said, "The desert don't take people." He looked up at me, held my eyes with that hard, dry stare. "It calls 'em." I didn't ask what he meant. I just left. But his words stuck, like a burr under the skin. The idea that maybe what I'd been experiencing wasn't just some freak trick of wind or mind, but something older. Something built into the bones of the land itself. You spend enough time out here, you stop looking for answers. You start looking for rules, patterns, ways to survive without drawing attention. But I'd already broken that rule, hadn't I? I saw it. I heard it. And worst of all, I stayed. I left Amboy behind with the old man's voice rattling around in my skull. The desert don't take people. It calls them. I didn't want to believe that, but something in me did. Not because it made sense, but because it explained what logic wouldn't touch. There's a language out there, a quiet one, and it speaks through absence, through the things it erases. Not just prints in the dust, but people. The next place I stopped wasn't really a place at all, just a slab of concrete off a dirt access road near the base of the Bristol Mountains, the kind of forgotten military lot that never got cleaned up after the Cold War. Concrete buckled from years of sun, twisted rebar poking through like broken ribs, but it felt like a good place to disappear. I stayed 3 nights. By then I was living differently. No fires, no music, no lights after dark. I slept in short, twitchy naps and kept the engine ready, like a man on the edge of war. On the second night, I woke to the sound of my own name being whispered, just once. Carter. Soft. Drawn out, right in my ear. I jolted up, slammed my head against the overhead shelf, scrambled for the flashlight. No one was there, just the stillness. The steady pulse of heat still lingering in the fiberglass walls of the rig. I opened the side door and stepped out into the dark. I shouldn't have. The desert at night isn't black, it's gray, like the color of regret. Everything gets hushed and distorted. Even the stars seem to blink slower. That's when I saw them. Not one, not two, but dozens of footprints in the dirt surrounding my rig. Barefoot, some large, some small, all moving in different directions, but none of them leading away. It looked like a gathering, a silent congregation of things with human feet and no intention of leaving a trail. My light passed over the cracked concrete slab, and that's when I saw something that made my blood freeze. A single rusted metal folding chair, facing my rig. It hadn't been there the day before. No footprints led to it, but it was there, waiting. I backed into the rig slowly, not turning my back until the door was latched, bolted, decked, and covered with everything I could move in front of it. My breath was ragged, my palms slick with sweat. I curled into the driver's seat and kept the blade in my lap, the flashlight off, afraid that even a flicker might invite something. And then came the dragging. Not footsteps, dragging. Something being pulled across gravel and sand. Pause. It circled the rig, once, twice, never fast, never impatient, and then it stopped, directly under the driver's side window. I didn't look, I couldn't, but I heard it breathe. A slow, wet exhale, the kind that has weight to it, like it had lungs, but not quite human ones, like it wasn't meant to breathe above ground. That was the moment I thought about the gun. I didn't have one, never wanted one, thought they made people reckless. But in that moment, I would have traded everything for a single bullet and the illusion of control. I sat there until morning. Didn't blink, didn't move. And when the sun finally broke over the mountains, painting everything gold and sickly orange, I opened the door. Everything was gone. No footprints, no drag marks, no chair, except for one thing. On the windshield, drawn into the dust with a finger, were 4 words. You're facing the wrong way. I stood there for a long time, just staring at it. The wrong way? I turned slowly, heart stuttering in my chest. Behind me, the desert stretched out in all directions. Rocks, dust, sun, and something else. Far off, maybe half a mile, something shimmered. At first, I thought it was a heat mirage, just the usual wobble of light, but it didn't fade or shift. It stayed still, solid, like glass half buried in the earth. I climbed onto the roof of the rig to get a better view. That's when I saw the circle. It was massive, maybe 50 feet across, perfectly symmetrical, burned into the crust of the lake bed. Not a crop circle, not a prank. This was older, like the earth itself had been branded, and in the center, a single figure, standing still, too far to see details. But it faced me, and I knew, somehow, it had always faced me. I didn't go to it. I couldn't have, even if I wanted to. But I stayed up there until the heat chased me down, until the air felt thin and sharp, until I started questioning what I'd seen. The next night, I made a choice. I turned the rig around. Just like the message said, I pointed the windshield toward the circle, and that night, the desert was silent. Too silent, not peaceful, not calm. It was the kind of silence that waits. I slept finally, a full hour, maybe more. And when I woke up, something was in the passenger seat. Not a person, not a body, a book. Old, leather-bound. No title, no name. Inside were pages of symbols, handwritten, sketched, none of them familiar. Spirals, intersecting lines, shapes that made my eyes blur if I looked too long. But on the first page, in the same neat hand, was a sentence written in English. They walk in no direction, and yet they always arrive. I flipped through the rest. Maps, diagrams of constellations, measurements tied to lunar cycles, references to the crossing. And then tucked into the back pocket, a photo. Old, grainy. It showed a man standing beside his rig in what looked like the same spot I was in. But it wasn't me. He was older, thinner, sunburned, and behind him, barely visible in the distance, was the circle. Same size, same shape. I don't know how long I sat there staring at it. I only know that I hadn't found that place. It had found me. I didn't leave that morning. I couldn't. Even though the instinct to run was screaming inside me, white-hot and primal, I stayed parked right there, rig aimed at the circle, book laid open in my lap like it had always been mine. Something in me had changed. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was belonging. The wrong kind, the kind that doesn't feel earned, but decided. Like the desert had looked through me and said, "You'll do." I read through the pages again, slower this time. There were diagrams of human footprints arranged in spirals. Dotted lines that stopped mid-path with tiny hand-scrawled notes beside them. Departure unknown, no return. All routes converge inward. There were symbols that looked like eyes, but not human ones. Too many lids, too many lines beneath them, like tears carved into the page. And always, over and over again, that word, crossing. It wasn't just a place. It wasn't a trail or a time. It was an event, a moment when something came through, or someone went over. The old man back in Amboy had said, "The desert don't take people, it calls them." Now I was starting to wonder if maybe he meant it literally. Not death, not madness. Something older, something that didn't need to chase you because it invited you. You stepped toward it. You volunteered. But why me? Why now? I kept asking myself that as the sun climbed higher. The heat pressed down like wet wool, and the silence outside stretched to a kind of dull roar in my ears. I hadn't heard birds in days. No insects. Not even the wind whispering through dry branches. Just the hum of presence. That afternoon, I found something else. A single footprint on the step leading into my rig. Not mine. Too wide. Toes longer than they should be. Just one. Like someone had tested the boundary, touched the threshold. Inside the rig, I checked every cabinet, every drawer, every inch of space. It felt ridiculous, but I couldn't help it. Nothing. Until I opened the freezer. Tucked in behind the old bag of ice I hadn't used in a week was a stone. Small, smooth, perfectly round. It hadn't been there before. I know it hadn't. I picked it up. It was warm. Too warm. And etched into its surface, so faint I almost missed it, was the same spiral from the book. It felt like a token, a sign, a reminder. That night, I decided to test something. I left the book on the hood of the rig, opened to the page with the phrase, "They walk in no direction, and yet they always arrive." Then I sat in the dark. No lights, no movement, just me and the hum of the earth. Around midnight, I started hearing whispers, not voices, just fragments, shapes of language, the idea of words. They circled the rig, never loud, never urgent. Just there, existing, like the desert was clearing its throat. Then silence, and then a single tap on the windshield. I didn't move. Another. Then the book on the hood slid, just an inch or two. No wind, no vibration, just motion. I opened the door, flashlight in hand, stepped outside. The desert was glowing, not brightly, but subtly. The kind of light you'd get from phosphorescent plankton if they somehow coated the sand. A faint green-blue shimmer rolling across the lake bed in slow pulses. It was beautiful, terrifying, but beautiful. And in the distance, the circle had changed. There was something in it now. A figure, tall, not standing, not merging, like it was being lifted from beneath the earth, like the sand was birthing it. My flashlight flickered. The air felt electric. My tongue tasted metal, and then I heard it again, from behind me this time. "Carter, Soft, just like before. But this time I turned. There was no one there, just the rig. And yet my door was open. I hadn't left it open. I ran to it, jumped inside, slammed it shut. Nothing moved, nothing followed. But on the wall, written in condensation, like breath on cold glass, was a message. You saw it. You're halfway. I stared at those words until they faded. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Instead, I sat there all night, thinking, what does halfway mean? Halfway to madness? Halfway across whatever line the desert was drawing? I checked the book again, desperate for something, anything, that could tell me what was happening. I flipped toward the end. One page stood out. No symbols, no diagrams, just a list of names. First names only. No dates, no notes, just names. Dozens of them. Some scratched out, some underlined. And at the bottom, freshly inked in what looked like rust-colored pen, Carter. I shut the book, threw it into the cabinet, and I made a decision. I had to leave. For good. No more desert, no more footprints, no more signs. I needed pavement, people, noise. Anything but this haunted silence. I started the rig, wheeled it around, pointed it toward Route 66. I didn't even look back. The desert didn't try to stop me. That's the thing. It doesn't chase us, it waits, and I thought I'd made it out, but 30 miles later I pulled into a rest stop near Ludlow. Thought I'd wash my face. Breathe. When I got out of the rig, the ground felt wrong. Softer than it should have been. I looked down, and there they were. Footprints. Bare. Leading from the bushes to the door of my rig, then stopping. No trail away. Just like before. And next to the driver's door, wedged under the wiper, was the stone. Same one, same spiral. Still warm. I didn't touch the stone. I just stared at it, heart in my throat, like it might move if I blinked. The spiral carved into it seemed deeper now, etched, not scratched. And the warmth pulsing off it wasn't the sun. It felt internal, like it carried heat from somewhere else, somewhere beneath. I got back in the rig, started the engine, didn't look in the mirrors, didn't breathe until I was 5 miles east of Ludlow and the sky had begun to darken again. But the road didn't feel right. I don't mean it was damaged. The asphalt was fine. But there's something you learn when you've driven long enough through places this empty. Roads have a memory. They hold something, carry echoes of truckers, RVers, kids on cross-country pilgrimages. And that stretch of highway? It had nothing. No weight, no hum. It was like driving across paper. At some point, I realized the sun wasn't setting in the right direction. I was heading east. It should have been at my back, but it hovered low and red directly ahead, suspended like a threat, not a gift, the kind of light that makes things bleed when they're not supposed to. My GPS flickered and died. The compass app on my phone spun in slow, erratic circles, then froze entirely. And then I saw the sign. One of those old green highway markers tilted slightly from age. Kelbaker Road, 2 miles. I slammed the brakes. That wasn't possible. Kelbaker Road was behind me, 30, maybe 40 miles behind me. I'd driven away from it hours ago. I sat there, engine idling, staring at that sign as if it had personally betrayed me. And then I realized something else. I recognized the Joshua tree by the bend, the crooked one, with the broken arm that curled back toward itself like a question mark. I'd camped near that tree. Back in the beginning, that was the first site, the place where I'd seen the original footprints. Somehow, impossibly, the road had brought me back. No U-turn, no detour, just a slow, insidious loop, like the Mojave had folded in on itself, and me with it. I sat in the rig until night swallowed the road whole. I didn't drive, didn't sleep. Just stared out into the dark until the stars stopped looking like stars and started looking like holes. And then I felt it. That pressure. Not pain. Not fear. Presence. A thickening of air. A density behind my eyes. I stepped outside. Not because I was brave, because I had to know. I couldn't sit still while it circled. The sky above the lake bed was pulsing again. That same bioluminescent shimmer, green and blue and impossible to explain. And far off in the distance, the circle had returned. But this time, it was closer. Not physically, spiritually. Its center burned like a pupil, watching, waiting. I walked, Didn't mean to, but my feet moved slow and steady like I was being drawn on invisible threads. The ground beneath me softened, then hardened, then cracked. I walked until the silence began to buzz and the stars blinked slower. I walked until the air began to smell like ozone and stone and something older than rot. And then I stood at the edge of the circle. Not inside. Never inside. My legs stopped working 2 feet short of the border. My breath caught in my throat. In the center, something stood. Not a person. Not a shape. A density. A vertical weight of shadow and light. It wasn't watching me. It was waiting for me. And I understood something in that moment. Something that had been hinted at in the book, in the footprints, in the endless circling of routes. The crossing wasn't about going somewhere else. It was about going nowhere completely, about giving yourself to the silence until it took shape, until you became part of it. I backed away slowly, not because I was safe, but because I wasn't ready. Not yet. But it had marked me. I knew that now. I ran back to the rig, drove, didn't know where, didn't care, just drove until the stars thinned and the sunrise bled pale through the haze. And for the next few days, I kept moving. Towns, motels, parking lots behind grocery stores, anywhere with people and pavement, but it didn't stop. Wherever I parked, the signs returned. Footprints, books, stones, and the worst part, they were changing. The footprints were no longer barefoot. They were mine. Same size, same worn tread on the heel of my hiking boot, same inward toe on the left foot. I was walking in circles, even when I wasn't. And in every gas station window, every diner door, every motel mirror, my reflection felt delayed, a half second too slow, like I was already halfway gone. I tried to leave California altogether. Thought maybe if I crossed a real state line, a boundary made by people and fences and laws, then maybe I could slip out from under whatever this was. I pointed the rig toward Nevada, stayed on the main roads, didn't stop for anything but fuel. But the land didn't feel any different. The farther I drove, the more the desert looked like itself. Not a specific place, just one endless repeating texture. Like the Mojave had stretched, grown, followed me. And that's when I stopped seeing road signs altogether. I should have hit Baker. I should have seen billboards. I should have passed another soul on that road. But mile after mile, there was nothing. Just empty sky and cracked asphalt and the slow, creeping sense that I was the only thing moving. And then one day, I don't know how many days in by then, I found something new. A second book. Lying on the driver's seat when I returned from a failed attempt at sleep. Same leather, same paper, different handwriting. This one didn't have symbols. It had logs, dates, coordinates, descriptions of encounters. But they weren't mine. They were other people's. Some only a sentence long. Footprints outside rig. Vanished in moonlight. Saw the figure again. This time it knew my name. Knocking stopped. Breathing hasn't. One page toward the back just read, "He tried to bury the stone. Didn't work." Another said, "Turned off all lights. Still found me." Truck died at mile 74. Haven't moved in 3 days. She's under the dirt. Still listening. And then, there it was, my name. Written like all the others, except mine had a line underneath it. And beneath that, a sentence. His crossing was incomplete. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Incomplete. So I hadn't finished it, whatever it was, which meant it wasn't over. Wasn't over even now. I threw the book out the window. Didn't care if it came back. Didn't want to read another word. That night, I parked behind a shuttered gas station outside what should have been Pahrump. Tried to call someone, anyone. My phone lit up, 1 bar of service. I dialed my brother's number, rang once, twice, then silence. And then Carter. Same voice, same whisper. Not from the phone, from behind me. I dropped it, scrambled to the front seat, turned the ignition, nothing. Dead. Battery was fine, no warning lights, just dead. I opened the door to run, and I saw the dirt, not the ground. The dirt that was on me, my bare feet covered in dust, and behind me in the gravel leading away from the rig, footprints. Mine, naked, wet, pressed deep, but I hadn't stepped outside. Not since the night before. I looked around, panicked, and then I heard it. A low, rhythmic scratching coming from under the rig. I backed away, eyes wide, breath held, and then, rising from behind the rear tire, a hand, pale, long-fingered, covered in ash or dust or something like it. It didn't move toward me. It just gripped the bumper, like it was anchoring itself to the vehicle. And then I heard the voice again, not outside, inside, in my head. Not words, not language, just invitation, like a place calling itself home. That was when I understood the footprints weren't just messages, they weren't warnings, they were rehearsals, preparations for what came next. For me. Because I wasn't being haunted, I wasn't being chased, I was becoming. Whatever this thing was, this force, this consciousness, it wasn't trying to scare me away. It was welcoming me in. And I had already stepped too far. That night, I didn't try to sleep. I didn't try to drive. I sat in the center of the rig with every light off. And I waited. Not for rescue, not for answers, for arrival. That last night didn't feel like night at all. The dark came down fast, too fast, and the stars blinked out one by one until the sky wasn't a ceiling anymore. It was a void, an open door. I sat in the center of the rig and tried not to breathe too loud, tried not to think too loud. My body felt like it had been hollowed out and packed with stillness. No thoughts, no fear, just a quiet kind of surrender. And then they arrived. Not with sound, not with violence, with stillness. The air pressed in from all sides like I was underwater, and from the corners of my vision, those gray edges of perception you can never quite trust, I saw movement, subtle, slender, shapes walking in slow circles around the RV, dozens of them, each one barefoot, each one following paths that started nowhere and ended in nothing, but one of them stopped, right outside the rig. I didn't see it fully, just its feet and its shadow. Not cast by light, there was none, but cast by presence. And then I heard the knock, 3 slow, hollow taps on the side door. No demand, no urgency, just permission, an offer. My body moved before my thoughts could. I stood, walked to the door, hand hovered over the latch, and I heard the voice again, this time, not from behind me or under the rig or deep inside my skull. It came from inside the air itself. You've been walking a long time. I opened the door. Nothing was there. Just the desert, empty, wide, timeless. But the sand was marked. Dozens of footprints, all mine, some fresh, some faded, some too deep to have been made by human weight. I stepped out, felt the cold grit under my bare feet, though I didn't remember taking off my boots. I didn't remember much anymore. The stone was there in the dust, still warm, still glowing faintly at the spiral. I picked it up, held it in my palm. It pulsed like a second heartbeat. And suddenly, I remembered something I'd forgotten. There were stories before mine, hundreds of them, footprints left behind by men who vanished without a sound, campsites found empty, RVs still running, coffee still warm, people who were there and then not, and every time the same thing. No struggle, no trail, just absence. I walked out into the desert. The rig behind me, lights still off, phone dead, world asleep. And the farther I went, the less the land felt solid. It wasn't that the ground disappeared, it was that I did. First my thoughts, fuzzing around the edges, then my fear, dissolving like salt in rain, then my memory, peeling away like old film. And at the center of the desert, where the horizon collapsed in on itself, I saw the circle one last time. Only now, I wasn't outside it. I was in it. It wasn't marked in sand, it wasn't burned into dirt, it was etched into perception itself. I looked up, and they were there. Not figures, not monsters. Witnesses. They didn't reach for me, they didn't speak, they just stood, as if waiting for me to understand, and then I did. The crossing wasn't a place, it wasn't a death, it wasn't even a disappearance, it was a choice. A final step from one kind of being into another. Not transformation, alignment, as if everything I'd ever feared or resisted or fought to explain was just me denying what I'd always been becoming. I stepped forward, and the world shifted. Sound peeled back, light turned inside out, and I felt the sand beneath my feet vanish. Not into darkness, but into nothing. A beautiful, endless nothing. I don't know where I am now. I don't know if I'm anywhere. All I know is this: the footprints don't vanish. They continue, endlessly, inward. Because once you hear the desert, once you answer its voice, you're not lost. You're part of it. And sometimes, when the wind is just right and the sand still holds the warmth of the vanished sun, someone like you might camp where I once did. You might wake to prints, to whispers, to your name spoken softly in the night. And when you follow those prints, when you take that step, I'll be there, not to scare you, not to save you, just to witness. Because that's what we are now, the ones who never left, the ones who finally understood the desert doesn't want you. It waits for you. And it always has. It starts with stillness, not peace, not quiet. Stillness. A kind of breathless waiting you don't notice until you've parked, shut off the engine, and stepped out. The world just stops moving around you. No cars, no people, just trees, tall, spindly, ancient, watching you like you don't belong here. I remember the exact moment it hit me. I just killed the engine of my old 1977 Volkswagen Westfalia. The familiar puttering died out into the thick, moss-heavy silence of Gwaii Haanas National Park Reserve. I was far from any cell tower, far from any real road, ferry-hopped and forest-bound into the kind of place you can't just get to. I'd planned this for months. A solo trip, my first real test, me and my Westie, off-grid and alone on the islands of Haida Gwaii. My name's Marcus, 38, mechanic, but I always wanted more than oil changes and carburetor rebuilds. My dad raised me on camping trips, mostly in the Sierras and the Cascades, but we never made it this far north. He used to say the forests up here were older than names. He meant it like poetry. I took it like warning. I arrived late. Ferry delays, weather delays, the kind of things you think you can plan around until the wild reminds you who's in charge. I didn't mind. I liked being alone. Needed it, maybe. After my divorce and the burnout of everything I used to think was my life, this van became my spine. It gave me motion when I felt paralyzed. It gave me purpose when I'd lost my grip on anything that looked like one. That first night, I parked just off a narrow gravel path near a place called Windy Bay. I'd read that it was sacred ground, Haida Watchman territory, full of carved poles and old village remains. I told myself I'd visit respectfully, camp quietly, stay light on the land. But the stillness didn't sit right. It was the kind of quiet that feels like it's listening, like the land knows you're an intruder. No wind through the trees, no scurrying chipmunks, not even the buzz of mosquitoes, just the creak of the van as it settled on its shocks. I told myself it was just nerves. First night jitters. That's what I do when fear starts creeping in. I label it, put it in a box. Makes it feel smaller, manageable. I made tea on my propane burner, lit a small lantern, and opened a dog-eared book about Haida mythology. I like stories, real ones, the ones passed through mouths, not textbooks. I'd read about the Gagiad, the wild man of the woods. Haida legends said he was once human but became lost, consumed by hunger and isolation until he forgot who he was. His mouth always dripped salt water. His cries could turn your bones soft. Just a myth. I thought about that as the lantern flickered and the wind still refused to move. I lay down in the van, folded the bed out, tucked myself into the same flannel sleeping bag I'd had since high school. It smelled like cedar and campfire smoke. Safe. Familiar. I left the van windows cracked just a little, enough to hear the outside if anything moved. I always sleep better that way. The idea that you'll hear danger coming, but nothing came. And in some way, that's what started to scare me. The night didn't begin so much as hold. Like the sun dropped out of the sky and time stopped moving with it. The stars came out, sure, but they didn't twinkle. They just watched. Same as the trees. Same as the darkness outside the windows. I closed my eyes, drifted in and out. You know how that half-sleep state makes everything feel dreamlike? How sounds don't quite register right? That's when I heard it. A knock. Not a sharp rap like a human hand. No, this was dull, repeating, 3 times from the rear of the van. I jolted up, heart hammering in my throat. Listened, waited, nothing. Maybe something fell. A pine cone, maybe. I reached over, flicked on the small dome light. It buzzed softly, casting a warm yellow across the curtains, my backpack, the cluttered bits of gear and books. Everything was where I'd left it. I got out, stepped into the darkness, barefoot, like my flashlight clenched in one hand like a weapon. The gravel was cold, sharp. My breath steamed in front of me, even in July. I circled the van. No footprints, no broken branches, just the long, tall outlines of spruce and cedar, so still they looked painted onto the night. I waited, listened. Nothing. But the thing about silence is, once you've heard something, you can't unhear it. The knock kept echoing in my skull. Every gust of wind that never came, every twitch of shadow felt loaded. I got back inside, locked the doors, closed the curtains, not because I was scared, I told myself, just to keep the heat in. But I didn't sleep. I lay awake, tracking time by the dim shift in sky color through the curtain edges. Eventually, a bird called. One, then another. The forest began to stir hesitantly as if deciding whether it was safe to wake up. By morning, I laughed it off. Sleep deprivation, pine cones, maybe the van had settled weirdly. I'd parked on a slight incline after all, could have been anything. Still, I moved camp. I didn't decide to, exactly. I just packed up fast and started the engine without even making coffee. I headed south, deeper into the park. There's no real way to explain the roads here. They're more like the idea of roads. Logging paths, gravel threads through thick forest and swampland. I drove hours without passing another soul, just forest and fog. And then I found it. A clearing, small, half-eaten by alder trees, barely visible from the track. You wouldn't even see it if you weren't looking. It looked like it had once been used decades ago. Flattened earth, a broken fire ring, old bottle glass half buried in moss, forgotten. Perfect. I parked, shut off the van, and felt that stillness again. But different this time. Not quite menacing, just watching. I told myself this was better, that whatever had spooked me last night was gone or never real. I didn't know then that the scariest part of this trip wasn't something outside the van. It was what I'd brought with me. Something was starting to shift. Not in the forest, not in the van, but in me. And once it started, I couldn't stop it. By the time I set up camp at the second site, the sun was already folding itself into the mist. That's the thing about Gwaii Haanas. Light behaves differently here. It doesn't disappear in clean lines. It dissolves. Slowly, like color washing out of the world. I sat on the van's rear bumper and drank cold tea from a thermos. No fire tonight. Something about lighting a flame here felt wrong, not unsafe, just disrespectful. The silence of this place had a sacred kind of gravity, like the trees might whisper secrets if you stayed quiet long enough. And I wanted them to trust me. I told myself that, out loud even. I'm just here to see. I'm not taking anything. And that's when I noticed it. The first real sign that something was off. My voice didn't sound right. It echoed strangely in the clearing, like it had bounced off something just behind me. Something solid, something listening. I froze, turned, nothing there. Just my van, parked at a tilt, the pop-top still closed. I squinted past the trees, thinking maybe I'd seen movement, a deer or something, but no. The forest stood frozen. Still, like it didn't want to interrupt whatever was happening inside my chest. That tightness again, like being watched, but not from the outside. No, this came from inside me, a slow, curling sense of suspicion. Like my thoughts weren't entirely my own. I went into the van, shut the door behind me, and pulled the curtains closed. That's when I heard it again. Knock. But not from behind the van this time. From underneath it. 3 knocks. Soft, muted, like something trying not to be heard but needing to be felt. I held my breath so hard it hurt. The van didn't move. No rocking, no creaking. I reached slowly for the flashlight and rolled to the floor, heart hammering, breath shallow. I pressed my ear to the metal floor panel and waited. Silence. Then a scrape. Faint. Like something sliding across gravel. Close. Beneath me. I flung the door open and jumped outside, swinging the light under the van in one quick motion. Nothing. No animals. No tracks. No disturbed dust or broken twigs. I even crawled under it. My whole body went stiff from the cold metal and damp earth. I tapped the undercarriage myself 3 times just to match the sound. It didn't fit. Mine was louder, more metallic. What I'd heard was softer, like knuckles on dirt. I stood up slowly, the flashlight beam trembling in my grip. And then I did something I still don't fully understand. I called out, "Who's there?" I didn't say it like a threat. I said it like a question, like I half expected an answer, but no one replied. Of course not. So I got back in the van, locked the doors, again, like locks meant anything this deep in nowhere. I didn't try to sleep. I just sat there, flashlight in my lap, staring at the closed curtains, listening to my own breath grow shallow and fast. That's when I started to hear it. Not outside, inside. A dripping sound. Soft, rhythmic. From the back of the van. I turned around slowly, scanning with the flashlight beam. My water bottles were upright, no spills, no condensation dripping from the ceiling, but the sound was there. Drip, drip, drip. Coming from the cabinet under the rear seat, the one I never use. I crouched and opened it slowly, empty, dry, but the sound was louder now, like it was behind the wall paneling, inside the van's bones. I pressed my ear to the wooden interior wall. Drip, drip. Then a gurgling, like seawater sloshing around in a sealed space. My mouth went dry. I slammed the cabinet shut, backed away, and sat down hard on the bed. My hands were shaking, not from cold, from something deeper. Some primal recognition I didn't have words for. Something was in here with me. Not physically, not yet, but spiritually, psychologically. The van was no longer just mine. Something had followed me. Maybe from Windy Bay, maybe older than that. Maybe it had been waiting in this clearing long before I arrived, but now it had found a place inside me. I curled up on the bed, still dressed, flashlight in hand, and stared at the ceiling until dawn. I didn't sleep. I didn't blink. And somewhere between midnight and morning, I stopped being afraid of the forest and started being afraid of myself, because I remembered something. Not a memory exactly, more like a feeling, a fragment. Being under the van, looking up at myself through the floorboards and smiling. But that never happened, right? It couldn't have. Unless it wasn't me looking up. Unless something had taken my shape, a part of me, a darker part I'd buried a long time ago. Maybe this forest doesn't show you monsters. Maybe it just reveals the one you brought with you. I didn't leave the clearing the next morning. Not because I didn't want to, because I couldn't. When I turned the key in the ignition, the engine cranked once, twice, then died. The battery was fine, the lights worked, but the starter choked like something inside the van refused to move. I tried again and again. Nothing. I sat there, hands on the wheel, staring at the dashboard like it might explain what the hell was going on. Then I noticed it. The clock, frozen at 3:17 a.m., same time I'd heard the dripping, same time I remembered looking up at myself. I killed the battery switch and climbed out, trying to calm my breath. I told myself this was just mechanical. Something I could fix. I knew this van better than I knew most people. I'd rebuilt the engine with my own hands. No ghosts in the fuel line. No demons in the spark plugs. Just steel, oil, rubber, logic. I popped the rear hatch and lifted the engine cover, and froze. There was salt, not rust. Salt. A thin, white, crusted residue on the cooling fins, on the distributor cap, on the edge of the valve cover, like sea spray had settled into the engine while I slept. But I was 20 miles inland, and it hadn't rained. I reached in to wipe it away, and my hand recoiled. The metal was freezing. Not just cold, icy, like it had been submerged in ocean water and dragged back up. My breath caught. And in that silence, I heard it again. Knock. Not on the van this time, from the woods. 3 knocks. Slow, spaced apart, hollow like something striking a tree trunk deep in the forest. I turned fast, heart in my throat, flashlight beam jittering through the trees. Nothing. But I knew what was happening. The sound was moving closer. Not toward me. Around me. Circling. A slow orbit of noise like sonar, testing the edges of my mind. I should have left. I should have walked out. Packed a day bag, locked the van, and hiked toward the coast. But I didn't. I just stood there, paralyzed, like a man at the bottom of the ocean hearing pressure creak through his submarine walls. And then came the whisper. I swear to God I didn't imagine it. It came from behind me, near the front of the van. A voice. Low, not in English, not a language I recognized, just syllables, wet, deliberate, full of breath. And then it said my name, Marcus, quiet, like wind across wet leaves. I ran. I don't remember choosing to run. I just remember my legs moving, crashing through the underbrush, my boots slamming into roots and stones and soft earth. Branches clawed my arms. My flashlight bounced wildly. I wasn't even aiming it. I was just running toward not here. But the sound followed me. Not footsteps. Laughter. Small, dry, close. Like someone was running beside me, but slightly behind. Just out of view. I reached a ridge and stopped, bent over, panting, ribs aching. The forest below me was so thick it looked like one solid wave of green, endless and uncaring. That's when I realized something impossible. I'd been running in a straight line, and I was back at the van. It was parked just 30 feet down the slope, exactly where I'd left it. Except the door was open. I hadn't left it open. I hadn't. I stood there frozen, trying to make sense of it. Then I heard it. Not a whisper, not a knock, a voice from inside the van, crying, soft like a child, muffled, broken. And I recognized it was my own, my voice, crying from inside the van. I should have run, but instead I walked down the slope, slowly, each step heavier than the last. I reached the open door and listened. The crying stopped. I leaned forward, flashlight trembling, and looked inside. Empty. No one, no movement, but something had changed. The cabinets were open, my bags rifled through, my books scattered across the floor. My thermos was lying sideways, lid off, tea spilled in a dark stain that looked far too much like blood in the low light. And the rearview mirror, it was turned toward the driver's seat, facing it, like someone had been sitting there watching themselves. I stepped inside, sat in the seat, looked into the mirror, and for half a second, I swear, it wasn't my face staring back. It looked like me, but the eyes were wrong. Too wide, too calm, too knowing. I blinked. It was gone, just me again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was in these woods wasn't trying to scare me. It was trying to replace me. I didn't speak for the rest of that day. Didn't eat, didn't drink. Just sat there behind the wheel, staring through the windshield at trees that didn't move. Watching fog roll in, not from the coast, but from between the trunks, like the ground itself had started to breathe. It was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that invites peace. This was watching quiet, observing, holding its breath. By dusk, I tried to convince myself I was hallucinating. Maybe I'd hit my head. Maybe I was going through some delayed emotional breakdown. Isolation does things to the mind, right? Sleep deprivation, dehydration. But that logic rang hollow, not because it didn't make sense, but because I felt fine. I was thinking clearly. That was the part that scared me the most. Nothing in me felt frayed or broken, no confusion, no disorientation. If anything, I felt hyper-aware, over-aware, like my body and mind had synchronized in some primal way. Every creak of a branch outside registered in my teeth. Every shift in the forest floor trembled up through the tires and into my spine. And I started to remember things. Things I hadn't thought about in years. Not memories. Regrets. Like how I left my brother's funeral early because I couldn't stand the sound of our mother crying. Or how I let my marriage dissolve slowly, silently, because I was too proud to admit I couldn't be alone. How I'd bought this van as an escape, not a pilgrimage. I thought I came out here to find peace, but now I understood. I came out here because there was nowhere else left to run. That night, I didn't try to sleep. I just laid down in the van, doors locked, windows covered, and listened. And the forest spoke. Not in language, in presence. A rhythmic sound started up again around midnight, not knocks. Scraping, long, slow, deliberate scrapes against the side of the van. Not claws, not metal like something dragging a branch. No, a finger along the paint. It moved from one side of the van to the other, a full loop. Then silence. Then again. I didn't move. I barely breathed. My flashlight sat dead next to me. Batteries drained even though I'd used it for maybe an hour total. I held a pocket knife in one hand, the other clenched into a fist so tight I couldn't feel my fingers. The scraping stopped, and I waited. Then something knocked on the window, hard, only once. But it was right next to my head. I jumped so violently I slammed my knee into the sink cabinet. My heart was a drumbeat, chest cracking open with panic. I didn't pull the curtain back. I couldn't. Because in that moment, I realized something that chilled me colder than the outside air ever could. I wanted to see what was there. Not out of bravery, out of recognition. Like a voice inside me was saying, you know what it is. You've always known. It's just time you stopped pretending you didn't. That's when the van door handle jiggled. Deliberate, careful, not frantic, testing. I lay there paralyzed, barely keeping my breath shallow, ears straining. Then the lock clicked. Unlocked. From the inside. No one touched it. I was watching it the entire time. The handle slowly lowered, but the door didn't open. Whoever or whatever was out there didn't need to come in because it was already here. I stayed like that until dawn, never moved, never opened the door, just listened to the forest pulse and breathe, the van groan and creak, and my own thoughts begin to unravel into something not quite mine. When light finally came, I stepped outside. The air smelled different, not like dew, not like soil, like salt. And every single window on the van had a single small handprint on it, each one identical, pressed flat and perfectly centered. And each one was mine. Same scars, same lines, same shape, except smaller. Like a version of me that had never fully grown up, like a version of me I'd abandoned somewhere long ago. I backed away slowly, breath catching, heart thundering in my throat, and that's when I saw them. On the edge of the trees. Figures, not moving, not speaking, 5 or 6 of them. Human shapes, tall, thin, watching. I blinked. They were gone. But the pressure remained, that feeling you get when you know someone's standing behind you, breathing close, mouth open like they want to say something but won't. I went back inside, sat in the driver's seat, turned the key one last time. The van started. First try. Just like that. And I didn't smile. I didn't feel relief. I just stared out through the windshield at the forest that didn't want me, but had shown me exactly what I needed to see. The real danger of camping solo isn't bears. It's not storms, or hunger, or even ghosts. It's the mirror. It's the version of yourself that waits quietly in the dark, hoping you'll finally be still enough to hear it whisper. Because when it speaks, it doesn't lie. I didn't drive fast. Not because I was trying to be cautious, but because part of me didn't know if I was supposed to leave. Like the van had started itself, not out of forgiveness, but resignation. The road out of the clearing was narrower than I remembered. Branches pressed in harder against the sides, scraping the paint like fingernails on bone. Fog clung low to the ground, dense enough to hide the forest floor. I had to drive with the headlights off. Any bright light just reflected off the mist and blinded me. So I moved slowly, cautiously, not out of fear, but out of reverence. It felt like leaving a church after committing some quiet, unnameable sin. You don't run, you don't talk, you just walk away and hope the silence lets you go. I made it back to the ferry by nightfall. I didn't talk to anyone at the terminal, didn't check my phone, just bought a return ticket to the mainland and sat in the van, eyes forward, hands gripping the wheel long after the engine had been shut off. And when the ferry pulled away from Haida Gwaii, I didn't look back. I couldn't, because something in me had stayed, or worse, something else had left with me. And the first time I really knew that was 3 nights later. I was back in civilization, barely. A small RV park on Vancouver Island, gravel lots, humming generators, porch lights on timers. I parked under a sad little pine tree and tried to breathe like a normal human being, tried to forget. But that night, I woke up to a sound I hadn't heard since the forest. Knock, 3 of them, not from outside the van, from underneath it, again. But this time, I didn't panic, because I already knew. I stepped out barefoot, flashlight in hand, got on my knees and looked under the van. Empty. But the gravel was wet. Just a small circle of moisture directly beneath the engine bay. And it smelled like salt. I sat there for a long time, knees in the dirt, watching the damp earth and feeling something ancient stir in the back of my brain. A question I'd never dared ask before. What part of me wanted to stay out there? And what part of me did? I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I opened the journal I'd been keeping on the trip, flipped through the pages. Most were filled with the usual ramblings, quotes from signs, little sketches, to-do lists for van maintenance. But then I found something I didn't remember writing. Just a few lines, scribbled in my handwriting. No date, no context. Don't look in the mirror too long. You might find something looking back, and it will know your name. Underneath that, a small drawing. Just a handprint, smaller than mine. Pressed in charcoal. The smudge of a thumb dragged down like it was wiping something away. I slammed the book shut and shoved it under the bed. And then something strange happened. I started laughing. Not hysterically, not in fear, just softly, because I finally understood. This whole time, I'd been trying to escape things I didn't want to carry. Regret, guilt, loss. I thought a van and a forest and the edge of the map would leave all that behind. But you don't leave ghosts behind. You just stop running long enough to see them. They're in the fog, in the trees, in the sound of your own name whispered back to you in the dark. And if you're not careful, you start to see yourself from the outside. You watch yourself sleep, you knock on your own windows, and you cry in your own voice. Because the forest isn't haunted. You are. And sometimes the forest just helps you remember. I stayed on the road for 3 more weeks after that, not because I was chasing something, but because I was afraid to stop. Afraid that stillness would bring it all back, that smell of salt, that scraping beneath the van, the sound of my own crying in the dark. I stuck to the highways, campgrounds, places with lights and other people and the predictable hum of Wi-Fi signals. I parked near RVs with kids and barking dogs, noise, distraction. The illusion of safety. But even then, the quiet followed. It came in small moments. A breath too long between sounds, a flicker in the corner of my eye that vanished when I turned my head. Once I caught myself watching the rearview mirror for an entire hour, not checking the road, just watching, as if something might appear there, something that already knew how to drive. The strangest thing was, I stopped fearing it, not because I stopped believing it was real, but because it started to feel familiar, recognizable, like whatever lived out there in the moss and fog, whatever stared through my windows with my own eyes, had never been separate from me at all. And that terrified me in a different way, because once I saw that truth, I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't pretend I was just some guy on a soul-searching trip through the wilderness. I wasn't looking for peace. I was looking for a place to bury a part of myself so deep that it would never claw its way back. But the forest, it doesn't bury things. It brings them up, unearths them, shows you what's been rotting inside you all along. I kept thinking about that cabinet in the van, the one under the rear seat, the one where I'd heard the dripping, where I'd felt something gurgling like seawater. I hadn't opened it again since that night. But one morning in Oregon, I did. The van was parked near the coast, a calm, overcast morning, light breeze, waves in the distance, harmless, normal. I sat on the bed, took a breath, and opened the cabinet. Empty, except for the journal, the same one I thought I'd shoved under the bed. I opened it slowly. And this time, the pages were different. Everyone was filled, but not in my handwriting. Page after page after page covered in childlike scrawl, drawings of trees, the van, me, and always, always that same handprint, over and over, sometimes tiny, sometimes huge, sometimes so dark and smudged they bled through the paper like wounds. And on the last page, a single phrase, "You left me out there." I stared at it for a long time, tried to remember, tried to deny, but I couldn't, because I knew exactly what it meant. Not a person, not a spirit, not something outside me. It was the part of me I'd abandoned, the scared boy I pretended never existed, the grieving son who didn't cry at his brother's funeral, the lonely husband who smiled through a dying marriage, the small voice I'd buried under sarcasm and engine grease and 1,000 I'm fines. I didn't leave him behind in the woods. I'd left him behind years ago. And the forest, it just gave him a place to wait, somewhere quiet, somewhere still. And when I finally got quiet too, he knocked 3 times, and now I can't ignore him. So I stopped running. I found a spot in Northern California near the redwoods, not too remote, not too close to anything either. I stay there now, in the van. I don't drive much. I listen, I write, and sometimes late at night I hear soft knocks again, not outside, inside, just reminders that I'm not alone, that the part of me I tried to lose is still here, watching, listening, and waiting. Not for revenge, not for justice, just to be seen, to be held, to be remembered. And maybe that's the real danger of solo camping, not what might find you in the wild, but what might come home with you, what might slip into your reflection, your voice, your dreams. And if you don't make peace with it, it starts driving, and you just become the passenger. Let the trees be old, let the land stay sacred, and when the forest offers you a mirror, be brave enough to look, because the scariest stories aren't about monsters in the dark. They're about what we carry with us and what finally learns how to whisper back. I never liked driving at night, not even in the daytime desert towns where the road stretches straight and empty and everything around you feels like it's sleeping. But there was something different about that night in Arizona. The darkness didn't feel empty. It felt full, like something was holding its breath just outside the reach of our headlights. We were 4 hours southeast of Tucson, pushing deeper into Cochise County. I was behind the wheel of my '85 Volkswagen Vanagon, the tan and brown camper I'd rebuilt myself over 2 long winters in Ohio. Her name was Esther, and I trusted her more than most people. My girlfriend Callie rode shotgun with her boots up on the dash, picking at the peeling vinyl and humming some tune I didn't recognize. In the back, Danny and Elise argued quietly over something. Directions, snacks, maybe both. We were headed to Chiricahua National Monument. The locals call it the Land of Standing Rocks. It's a volcanic wonderland filled with impossibly balanced boulders that tower over winding trails and silent groves of pine and oak. The kind of place that doesn't seem real until you're standing in the middle of it. And even then, you're not sure if it's real or a dream you've accidentally walked into. We arrived late, too late, and I knew the second we passed the old wooden park sign that something was off. The air got colder than it should have. Not sharp, but hollow, like the cold you feel when walking into a basement that hasn't been touched in years. The trees pressed in tighter, and the rocks didn't just stand, they loomed, watching, judging. Callie laughed when I mentioned it. "You're just tired," she said, brushing her hand over mine. "You've been driving all day. Drink some water." But when I glanced in the rear view, even Elise had gone quiet. She was watching the cliffs, eyebrows pulled tight like she was trying to remember something. Or forget it. The campground was nearly empty. Only 2 other campers parked in the loop, both dark and still. I killed the headlights, and silence swallowed us. No wind, no birds, just the groaning crunch of gravel under the van's tires as I backed into our site. We didn't bother with a fire. The moon was near full and bright enough to see by, but it only made the shadows worse, long, unnatural back, cast at angles that didn't make sense. We ate cold beans and stale bread in silence, nobody really hungry anymore. Danny, always the restless one, volunteered to scout the nearest trailhead before it got too late. "Just want to stretch my legs," he said. "Trail map says there's a scenic loop just a 1/4 mile up. Be back in 20. He took his flashlight and walked off behind the rocks. I remember glancing at my watch. 10:27 p.m. He didn't come back. At first, we weren't worried. Danny was the kind of guy who always took his time, who wandered off if he saw a bird or a weird tree or just needed to think. We waited, joked a little. Elise called out once, then again. No answer. After 30 minutes, I grabbed my flashlight. Callie insisted on coming too. We followed the path he'd taken, the gravel trail snaking through towering rock spires that looked like giants frozen mid-argument. The deeper we went, the harder it became to tell direction. I swear the path forked differently than it had on the way in. My GPS lost signal the second we crossed a narrow stone bridge. And the weirdest part, it kept bringing us back to the same boulder. A squat thing, shaped like a hunched man with a flattened face, sitting in the middle of a dry wash. Callie tapped her phone screen. This is nuts. The maps glitched. I tried my compass. The needle spun slowly like syrup. Then the sound started. Not a howl, not a voice, not even an animal call. Footsteps, light, slow, deliberate, like someone was pacing behind the rocks just out of view. Always just behind. Never seen. The kind that stop when you stop. That tap in time with your heartbeat. That grow louder the more you ignore them. Kali's hand tightened on mine. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to feed the thing growing in my gut. That creeping recognition that this wasn't just being lost. This was something else, like we'd wandered into a place that wasn't on any map, a space between spaces. We called for Danny again. Nothing. Just the rocks echoing back, muffled and strange, like our voices were bouncing off wet cloth instead of stone. We turned back, or tried to. The trail behind us didn't match. The fork we'd taken, gone. The bridge, vanished. Just more spires, more cold-like, and more of that awful silence, broken only by those damn footsteps. I didn't think we were going to make it back to the van. But somehow we did. Elise was sitting on the bumper, knees tucked to her chest, flashlight off. When we asked her why she hadn't come looking, she looked up. And I swear, for a second, I didn't recognize her. Her eyes were wider than they should have been, lips pale. Like someone who'd been listening to something for a long time and still didn't understand it. "You're not going to believe me," she whispered. "What?" I asked. "I saw Danny," she said, "right after you left. Just for a second, I thought he'd come back." "Where?" She pointed toward the rocks behind the campground loop. "He was standing between two boulders, just standing there, looking at me. He didn't move, didn't say anything. Then he stepped back, behind the rocks, like someone was pulling him. We didn't sleep, not even inside the van. We kept the doors locked, windows cracked just enough to hear, and sat there, waiting, listening. That's when the whispers started. At first it sounded like wind, then breath, then words. Garbled, impossible to catch unless you weren't trying to listen. Then they'd slip in just faint enough to chill your spine. He's not yours anymore. Walk between, don't turn around. I must have passed out sometime before dawn, the exhaustion too heavy to fight. When I opened my eyes again, the sun was rising behind the rocks. The trail looked normal again. Our map matched. Even the compass worked. But Danny was still gone. And the van, Esther wouldn't start. I turned the key again. Nothing. The old Vanagon coughed once, like it was trying to wake from a bad dream, then gave up. Just a click. A pathetic final click, and then silence. I leaned forward, forehead resting against the steering wheel, breathing in the bitter scent of dust, rubber, and sweat. I'd rewired this engine myself, replaced the battery, sealed every hose. She had never failed me, not once, not in the Rockies, not in Death Valley, not even when we hit that freezing rain outside Flagstaff. But now, dead, hollow, like something had reached inside and turned her heart off. Callie sat beside me, arms wrapped around herself, face pale and unreadable. "I checked the voltage earlier," I muttered. "We were fine. We should be fine." She didn't answer. Behind us, Elise was pacing. Not fast, just that slow, anxious kind of motion where your body moves because it's too scared to stop. She kept glancing toward the same patch of rocks behind the site, the ones she said Danny disappeared behind. She hadn't spoken much since then. I tried the key again, then again. Click, click, click. I got out, lifted the rear hatch, no signs of damage, no loose wires, no reason for failure. I popped the fuse panel. Nothing wrong. Tried the jump box. It should have worked. It was like the van wasn't dead. It was refusing, like it didn't want to leave. Around 7:30 a.m., I gave up. I sat on the picnic bench, hands covered in grease, and watched the sky shift from gold to gray. The clouds rolled in silently, fast and low, like they were late to something. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. No cell signal, no other campers. We were alone. Except we weren't. That feeling, the one I'd had the second we crossed into the monument the night before, it hadn't left. It was stronger now. like the rocks themselves were closing in, watching from just behind the trees, whispering to each other in cracks and sighs too low for human ears. We had to move. "Let's go on foot," I said finally. "Visitor center's not that far. We follow the road back to Bonita Canyon Drive, maybe flag someone down." Callie hesitated. "And if Danny comes back?" "He won't." I didn't mean to say it like that. It just came out fast, raw, real. The truth had finally wormed its way through the denial and sat there on my tongue before I could stop it. Callie turned away. Elise said nothing. She just nodded. She looked older somehow, thinner. Like whatever she'd seen in the night had started to hollow her out from the inside. We packed what we could carry: water, a flashlight, the map, my Leatherman, a flare gun, just in case. The van. I locked the van. Not because I thought anyone would steal it, but because some part of me still believed she was alive in there, waiting. I needed her to stay. The road was quiet. The trees still didn't move. No birds, no bugs, no wind. Just the sound of our boots on gravel and the faint echo of our breathing. We'd gone maybe half a mile when we saw the sign. I stopped. Callie blinked. Elise gasped. It was the entrance sign. The same exact one we'd passed the night before. Welcome to Chiricahua National Monument. Same cracked paint, same crooked wooden post, same hand-scrawled campground full notice nailed to the corner, even though the campground had been nearly empty. "How?" Callie whispered. We had walked away from the campground. We turned around, walked another mile in the opposite direction. There it was again. Same sign, same post, same lie. Callie grabbed my arm, her grip fierce. "We're looping." "No," I said, voice shaking. "No, we're just turned around. We're tired. It's optical illusion. Look." But I didn't finish, because behind the sign, nestled among the trees, was the van, Esther, parked exactly where we'd left her, except her lights were on. We hadn't turned them on. We hadn't left them on. All three of us stood there, paralyzed, the cold pressing in around our spines. The driver's side door stood open, not wide, just cracked, like it had been opened slowly. "Did you?" Elise started, voice brittle. I shook my head. "No, I locked it. I locked the van." Then I saw it. The passenger window, Callie's side, fogged. One perfect circle, drawn by a fingertip, inside. My stomach turned. I felt it before I could explain it. That deep, animal dread that pulls your thoughts into your gut and makes you want to run without knowing why. But we didn't run. We walked forward, slow. Me in front. I raised the flashlight, even though the sun was up now, even though I didn't want to see what I was about to see. The door creaked as I opened it fully. Nothing inside. No person, no signs of entry. No handprints, no footprints in the dust around the van. But something had been there. Because on the back seat, sitting on top of Danny's abandoned jacket, was a small pile of rocks. 5 of them, each about the size of a closed fist, balanced perfectly, one atop the other, just like the spires in the monument, too smooth, too clean. Arranged carefully. Callie turned and vomited behind the van. Elise backed away until she hit a tree and slid down against it, knees to chest, whispering something I couldn't hear. I sat on the edge of the sliding door, staring at the rocks. My flashlight trembled in my grip. I don't know how long we sat there. Time was broken. The sun never seemed to rise any higher. The shadows didn't move. It was like we were trapped in a photograph, suspended in some pocket of space that refused to move forward. Then I heard it, a voice. Not loud, not clear, but close. "Elise." She went ridger, I whispered. "I know that voice," she breathed. "That's Danny. That's Danny's voice." "It's not him." She stood. "Elise, no." But she was already moving, walking toward the rocks, the ones behind the van, the ones she had pointed to the night before. I ran after her. We both did. But by the time we rounded the bend where she disappeared, the trail split again. Left and right, empty. No footprints, no sound, no Elise, just the smell of stone and dry rot. And behind us, far too close, the voice returned. "Don't leave her behind." I didn't yell. I wanted to. God knows I wanted to scream Elise's name into the air, curse the rocks, curse myself, cry out like the sound would make her real again. But I didn't. because something deep in me, some ancient survival instinct buried under years of logic and planning and repair manuals, whispered the truth. It's listening. The trail split in front of us. Two identical forks, each choked with stone columns and bent trees. No markers, no footprints. Just a faint breeze, sour and cold, that stung the back of my throat like wood smoke and vinegar. Callie gripped my arm. She was right in front of us. I nodded. She's just around the bend. No, she's not. Callie looked at me, then past me. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused, like she couldn't quite hold on to what she was seeing. I heard him, she whispered. Don't. Danny, I heard him. It's not him. I didn't know how I knew that. I just knew. The way you know a shadow isn't supposed to move on its own. The way you know when someone's watching you in an empty room. Callie knelt down suddenly, fingers brushing the dirt at the trailhead. There's something here. At first I thought she'd found a track. But it wasn't a footprint. It was a symbol. Scratched into the earth like it had been drawn with a stick or a broken bone. A loop intersected by a jagged line, surrounded by tiny triangles. Primitive, intentional, and fresh. There were more, all around the path. Some carved into bark, others into the surface of flat stones nearby. A language of warning we couldn't read. I took her hand. We're leaving. But no more looking, no more listening. But Elise, I know. I didn't add that we were next. We started back toward the van again, or what should have been the van, taking careful steps, moving faster than before, but not running. I don't know why I thought speed would trigger something, but I did. It felt like a trap that only sprung if you panicked. But the way back wasn't the way we came. The trail behind us had changed. The air felt thicker, like we were walking underwater. Each breath felt shallow, like it only filled half my lungs. My ears rang, my skin crawled, and the shadows had shifted again, no longer aligned with the angle of the light. I stopped, pointed. There was the van, but it was wrong. Parked in the same spot, same trees, same slope, but covered in dust. And not just desert dust from the trail. I mean, layers of it, like it had been sitting there for years. Windows cracked, one tire flat, paint sun-faded and peeling. Callie whispered, "That's not possible." We stepped closer. Inside, the pile of rocks was gone. In its place on the middle seat was something else. A shoe. Elise's. Worn canvas. The left one. I turned to Callie. Run. She didn't ask questions. We bolted. No direction. No map. Just movement. Through brush over stone, ducking under branches that clawed at our faces in packs. The sound of our footsteps filled the canyon, louder than it should have been, echoing in ways that didn't match our rhythm. Then came the laughter. Not human. Too low. Too dry. Like wood rubbing against wood. A rhythm that mocked speech but never quite became it. Like something trying to imitate a person without understanding what words were. It followed us everywhere. We came to a clearing. A strange bowl-shaped depression surrounded by stone towers. Perfect circle. No trail in, no trail out. Just the earth and a scent. Sweet at first, then foul. It was the smell of something dead, but not rotting. Preserved. Like old meat wrapped in herbs and forgotten in a dark cellar. My stomach clenched. In the center of the clearing, half buried in the dirt, was a door. Just a door. Upright. Wood. Weathered gray. With no frame. No building. Nothing behind it. Callie stopped dead. I grabbed her arm. Don't. She didn't move. I pulled her. Callie, we're not going through that. I don't care what's on the other side. But what if that's how they got out? I wanted to scream. Out of what? Out of where? She blinked, and for a second I swear her eyes weren't her eyes. They were glassy and full of depth. Not like pupils, like holes. Like tunnels leading down into a place I never wanted to see. I shook her. Her knees buckled. She gasped. Then behind us, a sound I'll never forget. A knock. 3 times. Clear. Measured. On stone. Callie jerked back to life. It's following us. We ran again. This time, the trail narrowed. Stone walls rising on both sides, funneling us into a crevice so tight I had to turn sideways to pass. The air was damp here, sharp with the smell of lichen and minerals. The sun was gone. Not set, just gone, replaced by a pale bluish haze that had no source. And then I saw it. Etched into the wall ahead in red, Turn back before you belong. The letters were crooked, shaky, drawn with something that flaked, not paint. I didn't stop to think about what that meant. We pushed through, scraped and bleeding from the brush and stone, until suddenly, light, real light, a break in the trees. We stumbled out into an open field, and there it was, the road, the real road, Bonita Canyon Drive. I collapsed. Callie dropped beside me, gasping, crying. A car passed. We screamed, waved. They didn't stop, but they saw us. We were real again. Somehow we'd escaped, or so we thought. Because when we turned around, the trail we'd come from, gone. Not hidden, not overgrown, just not there. Only flat stone and dry grass, as if the land had swallowed it whole. We didn't talk for a long time, not while we staggered down Bonita Canyon Drive, not when we flagged down a ranger patrol truck just after the second bend, not even when we sat on the stone steps of the visitor center, wrapped in emergency blankets, sipping lukewarm water that tasted like copper. They asked the usual questions. Are you injured? Are you dehydrated? Do you know where you are? We nodded, answered what we could. But when they asked us what had happened, we lied. We said we got lost after dark, took a wrong turn on the Echo Canyon Loop, got separated from our friend, never found him. Van wouldn't start. We left out the whispers, the rocks, the looped road, the door. We left out Elise because some part of me knew they wouldn't believe us. And worse, that they might. And if they did, they'd ask us to take them back. I wasn't ever going back. An hour later, they towed the van. Esther sat strangely still on the flatbed, as though she'd finally gotten what she wanted. Rest. Her windows, which had fogged from the inside just the night before, were now clear and cold. When they lowered her outside the visitor lot, I half expected the pile of rocks to be back on the seat. Or the shoe. Or something worse. But it was just empty now, like she'd never left. Callie sat beside me on the curb, her hands wrapped around her elbows, staring into the gravel. They didn't find anything, she said. I know. They looked. They sent 2 guys into the upper canyon with radios. They won't find anything. We both sat there, trying to make the world normal again. The air had warmth to it now. The sun was real. Birds chirped in the mesquite nearby. Kids laughed in the parking lot, climbing in and out of SUVs with tourist maps and souvenir hats. But it all felt staged, like we'd stepped into a memory, like the world was putting on its face for us, smiling too wide, acting too calm. Callie whispered, "Do you think Elise is still alive?" I didn't answer, because I couldn't tell if that was the real question anymore. The real question, the one I was too scared to ask out loud, was something else entirely. Is this really over? That night, we stayed in a cheap motel in Wilcox. Dusty carpet, weak shower pressure. But we didn't care. We locked the door, drew the blinds, blocked the peephole with a piece of tissue and tape, sat awake on opposite beds until we couldn't keep our eyes open. I dreamt of stone, endless corridors of standing rocks stretching in every direction. The sky was red. The stars burned black. And between the boulders, something moved. Not fast, not slow, just certain. I woke up gasping, throat dry, hands clenched. Callie hadn't slept. She sat by the window, blanket draped over her shoulders, watching the parking lot below. When I called her name, she didn't flinch, just said, "I don't think it let us go." I joined her. The parking lot was empty, except for one vehicle. A white van, not ours, not even a camper, just plain. No windows, no plates. Parked directly across from our room, headlights off, but pointed right at us. I wanted to open the curtain wider to check the driver's seat, but something in me refused. Instead, I let the fabric fall, slow and silent, and backed away from the glass. We packed before sunrise, didn't even shower, just grabbed our things and left. I didn't feel safe until we were 5 hours out, halfway into New Mexico, with the van's engine finally running smooth again and a gas station burrito in my lap. Even then, I kept checking the rear view. Not because I thought something was following us, but because I was scared we'd see the entrance sign again. Welcome to Chiricahua National Monument. Kali left me a week later. Not out of anger, not out of grief. Just silence. She said she needed to find a place without rocks, without trails, somewhere flat, open, honest. She moved back to Kansas. I didn't blame her. I started seeing a therapist, tried to talk about Danny, about Elise, about the place, but I never said everything, just the pieces I could wrap words around, which honestly weren't the parts that kept me up at night. The things that haunt me don't have names. They don't scream. They just watch from corners, from behind windows, from doorways that shouldn't exist. One night, I woke to a sound. Not a scream, not a whisper, just a single dry knock 3 times on the wall beside my bed. I live alone. I check the apartment. Nothing. Windows locked. No one in the hallway. No one on the fire escape. I told myself it was a dream. Then, as I crawled back into bed, I noticed something on the windowsill. 5 stones, small, perfectly balanced, just like before. My therapist says I'm traumatized, that I'm projecting guilt, that unresolved grief often takes symbolic forms. He's probably right, but I haven't been able to drive since then. Esther sits in storage now, covered, quiet. Sometimes I visit her. Sometimes I sit behind the wheel, close my eyes, and pretend none of it happened, that we never took that trip, that we never stopped at that campground, that I never saw Elise walk into the rocks and vanish like smoke. But pretending doesn't last long, because eventually I always hear it again, somewhere far off, somewhere just behind me, that dry, crooked laughter, and a voice that doesn't echo, it inhabits. Don't turn around. I kept telling myself I wasn't going back. Every time I passed a road sign that pointed toward Arizona, every time I saw a brown and white national monument placard, every time I heard the sound of gravel under tires or wind pushing through pine, I told myself, never again. But the body has a memory that the mind doesn't control, and sometimes the only way out is through. It started small. Random emails from hiking groups I'd never joined, advertising primitive formations and standing stone mysteries. Packages on my doorstep with no return address, filled with brochures for Chiricahua, glossy, pristine, brand new, like someone was printing them just for me. I moved apartments, changed my number. Didn't matter. One morning, I found a slip of paper tucked into the crack of my front door. No note. Just a symbol, the same jagged loop with the triangles drawn in red marker. I didn't sleep that night, didn't sleep the night after that either. It wasn't fear anymore, it was inevitability. Something had opened, and something was waiting. So I gave in, packed a bag, not with hope, just preparation. Flashlights, compass, spare batteries, a flare gun. The same one from that night. Useless then. Maybe useless now. I drove out of New Mexico just after dawn, passed through the Dust Belt towns like a ghost, watched the familiar desert creep back in around me, white yucca, creosote, and those jagged silhouettes of the Chiricahua Mountains rising like a broken wall across the earth. The air changed as I crossed into Arizona, thicker, drier, older. By the time I reached the National Monument entrance, it was dusk. I didn't remember deciding to drive straight there. I just remember arriving. No cars in the lot, no rangers, no signs of life, only the entrance sign, exactly as I remembered it. Welcome to Chiricahua National Monument. Still cracked, still crooked, still lying. I parked where we'd camped last. The site hadn't changed, not one bit. Same overgrown brush, same black scorch mark from an old fire ring. The rocks behind the site stood like teeth, crueler somehow, sharper, closer than I remembered. I didn't wait. I took the same trail Danny had walked. Alone this time. Not because I was brave. Because there was no one left to follow me. The path forked as it had before, and again it made no sense. The map didn't match. The compass spun, but I knew which way to go now. Because I wasn't trying to escape anymore. I was going toward it. The landscape twisted slowly, not all at once. You don't notice when the shadows grow teeth or when the wind starts carrying rhythm instead of randomness. It's gradual, like falling into a dream where you never noticed the rules had changed until it was too late to wake. The first sign was the sound, not footsteps this time. Breathing. Behind me, always behind me, slow, deep, patient, never hurried, never threatening, just present, like someone walking just out of step. I didn't turn around. The second sign was the smell, not rot, not decay, incense, charcoal, burned herbs, something bitter and ancient like rituals from a time before language. It came and went with the wind, which now blew in sharp, sudden gusts that didn't move the trees. The third sign was the voice, not words this time, just tone, calling without language, not from outside, from inside. It reached into my memory, touching places I'd buried deep. My mother's voice calling me home, a teacher's voice whispering my name in an empty hallway, Elise, laughing, just once. Then silence. I kept walking. Eventually, I reached the clearing. The same circular depression, the same door in the center, upright, frameless, meaningless. But now it was open, not swung wide, just cracked like it was waiting for me to decide. Behind it, only darkness, no floor, no edge, no bottom, just depth. And I knew, with a certainty colder than bone, that this is where they'd gone. Danny, Elise, the version of me that once believed the world made sense. I don't know how long I stood there, a minute, an hour, a lifetime. Then I heard it. Not behind me, not around me, within me. A knock, 3 times. But this time it wasn't warning me. It was asking, inviting, like an echo of my own heartbeat. I stepped forward, not because I wanted to, because I needed to understand. But as I reached for the edge of the door, something changed. The air thinned, the pressure in my ears vanished, and the darkness behind the door blinked. Not metaphorically, literally, like an eye. And I understood, finally, what Shirakawa was. Not a place. A mouth. Not a monument. A memory. Older than language. Older than stone. Something that waits in the cracks between understanding. That feeds not on bodies, but on loss. On the things you refuse to confront. It hadn't taken Danny. It hadn't taken Elise. It had made us leave them behind. We had chosen. It didn't steal. We abandoned. That was the price. That was always the price. I stepped back. For the first time in months, the voice went silent. The air cleared. The door closed, not slammed, just eased shut like a page turned in a forgotten book. And when I blinked, the trail was gone. The clearing was gone. I was standing in the middle of Bonita Canyon Drive. Headlights in the distance, a car approaching. Real, present, alive. I wish I could say that was the end of it, that the door shut, the trail disappeared, and I walked out of the monument reborn. Stronger, wiser, healed. That the sun felt warmer on my skin again and the night stopped humming with invisible teeth. But that's not how these things work. I drove east until the desert flattened out behind me and the mountains shrank into haze. I didn't stop. Not for food, not for sleep, not even for gas, until I was nearly running on fumes. And even then, I barely spoke to the clerk. He asked me how far I'd driven. Too far, I said. He smiled like he understood. Maybe he did. That night, I checked into a small roadside inn in Las Cruces. Clean sheets, hot water, a bed that didn't creak. I lay there for hours, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun slowly, each rotation clicking in time with my breath. Something in me had changed. I could feel it under my ribs, like a new organ. Heavy, silent, a reminder. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up, because it wasn't my room. The bed was the same, the sheets the same, but the air was different. Still, pressed, not dead, waiting. And on the nightstand, where I'd left my phone charging the night before, was something else. A rock, one I recognized. Rough edges, obsidian flecks, too smooth on one side like it had been rubbed by centuries of fingers. One of the 5. I didn't touch it. I packed my things, left the key on the counter, and drove again. For weeks, I didn't stop moving. City to city, motel to motel, back roads, gas stations, RV parks. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that door, slightly open, and every time I blinked too long, I swore I could hear the knocking start again. 3. Always 3. Some nights I'd wake up mid-sentence, whispering names I didn't recognize. Other nights I'd find pebbles in my boots, in my sink, in the cup holders of my van. The world hadn't let me go. It had just let me run. And I was starting to wonder, had I even escaped? Or had it just come with me? I finally settled in a little town in southern Colorado, a place with more sky than roads, no monuments, no towers, just wind, wheat, and old wooden homes that leaned into the prairie like tired pilgrims. I took a part-time job at a hardware store. No one asked where I'd come from. No one needed to know. And for a while, it worked. The nights were quiet. The knocks stopped. The stones didn't appear. I started to believe I could live with it. Not forget. I didn't want that, but absorb it, carry it like a scar. Until last Friday, I was closing up alone, sweeping the floor, turning off the lights, locking the back exit. I heard the bell above the front door jingle. We were closed. I came around the corner, no one there, just the faint smell of dry earth and scorched wood. And on the floor, right in front of the counter, were 2 footprints, bare, damp, leading out the door, but the floor had been dry all day, no spills, no leaks, and the prints, too small to be mine, too wide to be a child's. I followed them out onto the porch. Nothing. Just the wind, rattling the screen door and pushing dust across the parking lot. I stood there, breathing in the night, waiting to feel the fear rise again. But it didn't, not like before. This time I felt empty. Like the fear had already passed through me and left something else behind, resolve, maybe, or ruin. It was hard to tell. That night, I did something I hadn't done in months. I wrote it all down. Everything. The drive, the rocks, Danny, Elise, the door, the knocking. I didn't know why. Maybe to get it out. Maybe to leave a record. Maybe to stop pretending that silence was safety, because silence was how it started. That's what Shirakawa taught me. You don't lose people all at once. You lose them by increments, a decision delayed, a voice ignored, a warning laughed off, and by the time you realize you're alone, the thing already has its hands on you. Sometimes I think Elise knew that. That's why she walked toward the rocks. Not because she was tricked, but because she recognized something in them, something familiar, something she'd carried long before we arrived. We all carry something, fear, guilt, regret, and the land, that ancient, broken land. It feeds on that. It doesn't want your body. It wants what you won't say out loud. I don't dream about Shirakawa anymore. I dream about a hallway, endless, white, flickering lights above, and at the far end, a door. Sometimes it's wood, sometimes stone, sometimes it's metal, rusted and warped, but it's always closed, and I'm always walking toward it. Never fast, never slow, just moving. And every step I take, I hear it again. Thrina voice, my own maybe, saying, "It's time." I started keeping the door open. Not that door, not the one in the clearing, not the one that blinked, but the one to my trailer. Just cracked. Not because I was waiting for something to walk in, but because part of me already knew it was here. I don't mean something literal. No shadows on the wall, no footsteps in the gravel, just presence. A hum behind every silence, a pause in the middle of every sentence, like the air was listening. It started small. I'd reach for my keys and find them moved, exactly 2 inches left of where I'd left them. I'd hear footsteps behind the trailer, slow like pacing, and find no prints in the dust. The wind would stop suddenly, like it was waiting for something else to speak. It never scared me, not the way it should have. Because somewhere, deep down, I understood. I had brought it with me. Not it exactly, but the mark. A kind of residue. The price of survival. I was the one who left. Elise didn't. Danny didn't. And you don't walk out of a place like that without carrying something for the ones who didn't come back. Most nights I sat on my porch and stared at the horizon, thinking of the last time I saw Elise, the exact way she turned her head, the sound her boots made in the dust, the strange calm on her face when she heard Danny's voice and followed it. And it always came back to the same question. Why didn't I stop her? Why didn't I chase her instead of hesitating? Why did I let her vanish into that place without tearing through the trees, the stones, the earth to bring her back? Some nights I told myself it was instinct, that I knew we wouldn't find her, but that was a lie. The truth is simpler. I was afraid, not of what we'd find, but of what I'd see in her eyes if I caught up. Something changed in her that night. She looked at that crack between the rocks, and she understood something I didn't. And I think that's why it let her in. It doesn't pull people. It waits for them to recognize themselves in it. And when they do, it opens. I started dreaming again last week. Same hallway, Same door, only it's closer. I no longer have to walk. I just blink and I'm standing in front of it, hand raised, ready. And something behind it whispers not my name, but hers. Elise. Like it knows I'm not the one it's waiting for. Like it's reminding me this isn't about you. I wake up gasping, not afraid, but ashamed because part of me doesn't want to bring her back. Part of me wants to join her, to understand what she saw, to feel what she felt when she let go of the fear and chose to step in. I think Callie felt it too. She hasn't called in months. But last week I got a postcard, blank, no return address, no message, just a photograph on the front, a black and white image of Shirakawa. The rocks, the trees, and in the center of the frame, a tiny figure, too far to see clearly, but I know that silhouette. I know it. Callie never took pictures on that trip, which means this photo came from someone else or somewhere else. It's sitting on my table right now, next to the flare gun, next to the symbol I carved into the wood with a penknife during one of my sleepless nights. The loop, the jagged line, the 3 triangles, a language I don't speak but feel like I've always known. Every night I stare at that postcard. Every morning I tell myself I won't go back. But yesterday I started packing again. I don't know what I'm hoping to find. Closure, redemption, her, myself. Maybe I just need to finish the sentence. I've been living inside since that night. Let it resolve. Let the silence have its answer. I fueled up Esther this morning. She still runs, barely. But that old hum under the hood feels steadier now. Like she knows where we're headed. Like she remembers. I've traced a route on the map, one I know will change the second I cross the line. The boundary, the fold, whatever it is. And I've left letters with the old man who runs the hardware store, just in case. Because I don't think I'm coming back this time. Not in the way people mean. Not with both feet in this world. But I have to try. Because if I don't, if I keep pretending that normal life is enough, then this thing I'm carrying will hollow me from the inside, like it did Elise, like it's doing now. I know what she saw in the rocks, what called to her. It wasn't death. It wasn't some monster hiding in the stone. It was recognition, a reflection, the part of her no one ever saw, finally seen, understood, welcomed. And maybe that's what I'm chasing too. Not answers, not safety, just understanding. Because if the land is a mouth and the door is an eye, then maybe we're the language. Maybe we're what it's been trying to say all along. And maybe the only way to make peace with something ancient is to let it speak through you. I crossed the state line just after midnight. No signs, no lights, just the wind shifting in the mesquite like a signal I couldn't read. Esther's headlights carved slow arcs through the black, and for the first time in months, I let the music fade out and the silence breathe. I wanted to hear it if it started again. The knocking, the whispers, the voice that never quite sounded like mine. The desert swallowed the road. I passed no other cars, not even coyotes. Just the kind of emptiness that doesn't feel empty at all. It feels occupied, like the pause between 2 heartbeats. I turned off the main road 3 miles earlier than the GPS suggested. Not because I remembered the way, but because the map didn't matter anymore. The land had already chosen its shape. The rocks welcomed me before I saw them. I felt it in the air, thicker, drier, like inhaling through a gauze soaked in dust. I parked where we'd first set up camp. The fire ring was gone. The log where Danny sat, gone. But the ground remembered. I stepped out and closed the van door behind me. I didn't lock it. There was no need. If it wanted me, locks wouldn't matter. If it didn't, I wouldn't need them. The moon hung low over the peaks, and for a second I could almost believe it was beautiful again, that those jagged silhouettes were just stone, that the wind was only wind. But then I heard it. Not footsteps, not knocking, just a voice, low, female, calling my name, not from the rocks, but from behind me. I turned. No one, just the van, silent, waiting, like it always had been. But something changed in me then. I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel dread. I felt welcome, not safe, but known, as if the desert had finally decided I'd earned the right to hear its real voice. I took the old trail on foot, no flashlight, no map, just instinct. and the rhythm under my ribs that pulsed in time with the steps I had once feared. I walked for what felt like hours, maybe minutes. Time doesn't move right here. The rocks rearranged, not in front of me, but around me, like I was being carried in a current of something older than gravity. And when I reached the clearing, I knew I was close. The door was there, not open, not closed, just present, part of the air, waiting, not demanding, not tempting, just waiting, like it always had been. And beside it, something else, a figure, not Elise, not quite, but something with her shape, her stillness, her understanding. She didn't speak, didn't move, but I knew she saw me, and I saw her, not as a ghost, not as a trick, but as someone who had crossed over and become part of the answer. She raised one hand, not to wave, not to beckon, just to acknowledge, and I raised mine in return. For a moment, everything in me went still. The questions, the grief, the guilt, gone, replaced by something vast and quiet, like standing in a cathedral of bone and stone and breath, where the sermon was silence and the preacher was the land itself. I didn't step through. I didn't need to, because I finally understood it wasn't about crossing. It was about listening, about not running from the places that terrify you, because sometimes the fear isn't a warning, it's a welcome, not because the land wants to hurt you, but because it wants to change you. I stayed until dawn. I watched the light move across the stone like fingers on an old scar. I sat in the same spot where Elise stood that night. I spoke her name into the wind, and this time, no echo came back, because she wasn't lost. She was home, and I finally was too. I walked back to the van, turned the key. Esther started on the first try. I didn't look back, didn't need to, because the rocks were no longer behind me. They were in me. The lesson, the warning, the truth. The wild does not forgive, but it does remember. And if you listen long enough and walk far enough and let it speak through you, you might finally understand what it means to be alive in a place that doesn't care if you are. I drove east again, not to escape, not to forget, but to carry the story. Not for me, not even for Elise, but for anyone who might one day step into the dark and wonder if they're alone. You're not. The desert knows your name, it always has. And if you're quiet, truly quiet, you might just hear it say, "Come home." I don't know what made me stop driving that night. Maybe it was the way the road curved too suddenly, and the headlights of the Volkswagen caught the thick, low-hanging mist clinging to the trees like it had a mind of its own. Or maybe it was the silence inside the van. You don't usually notice silence. Not until it starts to feel like pressure, like it's pressing against the windows, wrapping itself around your ribs from the inside out. But something in that moment told me to pull over. It was just me and Jess, my girlfriend at the time. We'd been driving since early morning, winding our way through southern Ohio in the camper, the kind with faded orange stripes down the sides and a roof that popped up like a tent from the 70s. It wasn't our first road trip together, but it was the first time we were trying to live out of the van for a week straight, hitting campgrounds, cooking over the little propane stove, parking wherever the map looked green and secluded. Hocking Hills had come highly recommended. Locals in Athens had told us it was beautiful this time of year. Early autumn, trees going red and gold, but not yet dead. We were looking for somewhere off-grid, not an official campground, but one of those pull-off sites near the river, the kind nobody tells you about unless you've lived around here a while. We had a rough pin dropped on Jess's offline map, a spot by Clear Creek, just below some old sandstone bluffs. We found it by accident, or maybe it found us. One dirt road turned into another, and before we knew it, we were bouncing down a narrow trail with no signage, just the steady creak of the van's shocks and the thickening forest around us. The sun had long gone down. I could feel the fatigue in my neck and behind my eyes. Jess was staring out the window, quiet, her fingers tapping on her thigh like she was keeping time with something I couldn't hear. Then the van just stopped. I let my foot off the gas, not because I wanted to, but because the forest had shifted. I can't explain it better than that. One moment it was just trees. The next, it felt like we'd passed into something deeper, like the air behind us didn't match the air in front of us. Jess turned to me slowly and said, "Did you feel that?" I nodded, even though I didn't know what I was agreeing to. We pulled into the clearing. It was small, barely enough room to turn around. A drop-off led down to the river, 20 feet below, slow-moving, catching bits of moonlight between broken stones. On the other side of the river, the bluff rose like a sleeping animal, its shape strange in the dark, too uneven to be natural. It loomed, quiet but watching. That was the word that stuck in my head. We parked by the edge of the clearing, headlights cutting through the trees. Jess jumped out, flashlight in hand, walking the perimeter like she always did, checking for trash, signs of life, animal tracks. She was the practical one. But that night, she stayed closer than usual. She didn't go down to the water. And neither of us said why. Inside the van, we cooked ramen. The little propane stove hissed, steam fogged the windows, and for a moment, everything was normal. The kind of silence you want when you're camping. No trucks, no phones, no people. Just wind in the leaves and the soft churn of the river below. But then it started. It wasn't a sound at first. It was a rhythm. The van shifted just slightly, a soft, distant vibration, like something was walking across the bluff on the other side of the river. I felt it before I heard it, a low, deliberate thump, then another, and another, not fast, not random, like footsteps, heavy ones. Jess looked up from her bowl. "You hear that?" I didn't answer. We both stood up at the same time, staring out the fogged windows. Nothing moved. The bluff stood silent, just black rock and trees. We turned off the lights in the van, sat still, listened. Thump, 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 and then nothing. I opened the van door slowly, the night air rushing in cold and sharp. I stepped outside barefoot, gravel biting into my soles, and aimed my flashlight across the river. The beam struggled, scattering against mist and trees, not quite reaching the bluff. That's when I noticed the smell. It came in waves. Not rot, not exactly. More like earth that had been buried too long. Wet stone, mold, something deeper than decay. It clung to the air just above the ground, making the hairs on my arms rise. Jess came out beside me, wrapping a flannel around herself. "Could be deer," she whispered. But I'd heard deer before. I grew up in Michigan. Hunted with my uncle, I knew what hooves on rock sounded like. This was slower, intentional, like it knew we were here. We didn't speak the rest of the night, just climbed into the pop top, zipped the screen closed, and tried to sleep. The sound didn't return, but the smell did. Once, around 2 a.m., I woke up to it hanging over the bed like a fog. My throat itched. Jess was asleep, but her face was turned toward the bluff, like she'd been watching it in her dreams. Morning didn't come with sunlight. It came with fog, so thick the trees looked like ghosts. We ate quickly, packed faster, and decided to hike a short loop before leaving. There was a trail behind the clearing that led along the ridge above the bluff. A local map in the glove box showed it as a lightly maintained scenic overlook. It didn't say how far or how steep, but we wanted to know what was across the river. We wanted to see it in the daylight. The trail rose fast, switchbacking through pine and shale. The air got colder the higher we went, though the sun had finally broken through the clouds, and then the woods just opened. We stood at the edge of a sheer drop. Below us, the river coiled through the trees like a spine. We could see the van, tiny and orange, parked alone in the clearing, and directly across from it, the bluff. Only now in daylight, it didn't look like a bluff. It looked like a wall, smooth in places, too smooth, angled in others, grooves that ran horizontal, evenly spaced, like erosion couldn't explain them. And there were markings, not carvings exactly, more like discolorations in the stone, black streaks arranged in odd curves and lines. Jess leaned forward, squinting. "That's not natural." I didn't respond, because I'd seen something else. On one of the stone shelves, about halfway up the bluff, there was something white, long, pale against the rock. It looked like a bone, Jess said aloud. She was already stepping closer to the edge. I grabbed her arm. "Don't," I said, too sharply. She pulled away. "I just want to see." I shook my head. Something's wrong with this place. She stared at me, and I could tell she didn't disagree, but she didn't want to say it out loud. We left the overlook without taking pictures. That's how I know we were both scared. We didn't document a thing, not even the van. Back at the clearing, the air felt heavier. The river looked darker. I kept glancing up at the bluff, expecting to see movement. Nothing did, but that didn't calm me. It made me feel watched. We packed up and drove out in silence, both of us keeping our eyes forward. I didn't look in the rearview mirror, not once, not until we hit pavement again, 20 minutes later. And even then, I swore I saw something white at the edge of the trees. Something long. We didn't talk about it for hours. We stopped in Lancaster to get gas and grab something hot to eat. Sat in the corner of a diner that hadn't changed its wallpaper since the 80s, pretending everything was normal. Jess tried to joke about how bad the coffee was, but her eyes were still tracking the windows, and she kept flinching at reflections. I didn't feel like laughing. Eventually, somewhere outside of town on Route 22, I said, "You saw it too, right? At the edge of the woods." Jess didn't answer at first. Just stared out the window as farms rolled by, cornfields waving in the wind like nothing had ever gone wrong out here. Then, it looked like a leg. And the silence returned, thicker than before, because saying it out loud made it real. It looked like a leg, white, narrow, hairless. It hadn't moved like an animal. It hadn't crouched or twitched. It had stood rigid between two tree trunks, just inside the shadow line, like it had waited for us to leave. We should have driven farther that night. Found a motel, parked at a rest stop under streetlights, but something pulled us back into the woods. I don't know if it was arrogance or denial. Maybe we just weren't ready to admit that the world was bigger than we thought, that there were places not meant for us, or maybe it was something else entirely. We camped that night in Tar Hollow, just 20 miles southeast, not deep in the forest, just inside a marked campground with a ranger station, numbered spots, and other people. Laughter a few campsites down, a dog barking somewhere in the distance, all the signs of safety. But I couldn't sleep. The van felt too small, too exposed. Every time a breeze moved the canvas of the pop top, I flinched. Every crack of a twig outside sounded like something with breath. Jess fell asleep just after midnight, curled under the sleeping bag with one arm over her face. I lay beside her for another hour, staring up at the ceiling. And then I heard it. Soft. Distant. Like a stone tumbling down a slope. Not close, not threatening, but there. And it was followed by silence that was too perfect. You know how forests hum even at night? Bugs, wind, the odd owl. This was silence that swallowed all of that. I climbed down from the pop top, slow and careful not to wake Jess. Slipped into my boots, grabbed the flashlight. The zipper of the sliding door felt deafening as it peeled open. I stepped into the night. The moon was sharp and full, hanging too low. It painted everything in colzer. I stood by the van for a long time, just listening. There were no people sounds anymore. The dog wasn't barking. The campers down the hill were quiet, and the smell had returned. Not strong, not obvious, just there, beneath the pine and dust, lingering like mildew soaked into cloth. I swept the flashlight in a slow arc. That's when I saw them. 3 long scratches down the side of the van. They weren't deep, just shallow scrapes in the paint, but they hadn't been there before. I would have noticed. I always checked the van, obsessively, years of habit from restoring it by hand. These marks weren't accidental. They weren't branches. They were too low, too parallel, too intentional. I backed away from the van, scanning the ground. That's when I saw the shoe print. Half a print pressed into soft earth. Long. Barefoot. But the toes were wrong. Too long. Too spaced. The middle one curved just slightly to the left, like a finger. I didn't wake Jess. I couldn't, because if I said it out loud, it would become real again. Instead, I climbed back inside and locked the doors, heart hammering like it was trying to warn me before my brain caught up. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, Jess noticed the scratches the second she stepped outside. She didn't say anything, just stared at them like she was waiting for them to move. We packed faster than we ever had, but before we left, she made me stop. She pointed at the ground, just past the fire pit. Another print. Not fresh, but definitely not old. Same shape, same wrong curvature. And this time, deeper, like it had been standing there, watching us. She looked at me and whispered, "It followed us." And we left. No breakfast, no photos, just a straight line out of the forest and north toward Columbus, where the buildings were tall enough to block the trees and the streets were paved so smooth you forgot what dirt felt like. But forgetting didn't help. I started having dreams, always the same. I'm back at the bluff. I'm staring across the river and something is on the shelf in the stone, just out of sight. I know it's there, but I can't make my legs move. My mouth is full of river water. My arms are too heavy to lift, and something whispers my name from beneath the ground. The worst part? Jess had the same dream. She told me 2 weeks later in a grocery store parking lot in Dayton. She hadn't been sleeping. Looked like she'd lost weight. Said she'd gone to a doctor, but they couldn't find anything wrong. She leaned against the side of the van and whispered, "It's in my head." That's when we decided to go back. Not to the clearing. Not yet. To the ranger station, to find records, to talk to someone, anyone, who might know what we saw, what followed us. We found a man named Barry who'd worked there for 17 years, mostly trail maintenance, sometimes helped during rescue calls. He looked normal enough, weathered like all men who've spent too much time in the woods. When we asked about the area near Clear Creek, his expression changed. Not fear, not confusion, resignation. "You went past the gates, didn't you?" he asked. "Down the dirt road that's not marked?" We nodded. He looked at our van, then back at us. "Shouldn't have done that." I asked him why. Told him what we'd seen, what we'd heard, the smell, the sounds, the prints. He listened, didn't interrupt. And when I finished, he said, "You got lucky." "Lucky?" I asked. "Something followed us." Barry shook his head. "If it followed you, you wouldn't be here." Then he told us something I've never repeated to anyone else, not until now. Barry's voice dropped when he spoke, like he wasn't sure who might be listening, even though we were standing in broad daylight under a sun-bleached awning next to a soda machine. "You ever hear of the ones who disappear but don't stay gone?" he asked. Jess and I looked at each other, not sure if it was a riddle or some weird park ranger metaphor. "You mean like people who go missing and come back?" I asked. He nodded, but it wasn't a comforting gesture. It was the kind of nod you give when you've seen something too many times to explain anymore. "They come back changed," he said. "Quiet. Not right. And always with this look, like they left something behind or something came back with them." Jess was staring at him now, arms crossed, her mouth pressed into a tight line. "You think we're one of them?" she asked. Barry didn't answer. He just leaned against the post and stared out across the gravel lot toward the tree line. "There's places out here," he said, "where the land folds wrong, places older than any maps, where time feels off, where things watch you back." He looked at me. "You saw the bluff? You saw the marks in the stone?" I nodded. I hadn't stopped seeing them since. "Those aren't natural," he said. "Locals used to say it was an altar, not a church kind, the opposite kind, the kind that doesn't ask for prayer, just blood." I felt Jess step closer to me, just slightly. Her shoulder brushed mine. "You think people are taken there?" she asked. Barry exhaled. "Not taken, invited." The silence that followed was the kind that lives in your teeth, in the soft part of your gut. It's the kind of silence that makes you realize something in your world doesn't add up anymore. And something essential just broke loose. We left without asking any more questions. What else could we say? There's no comfort in truth when the truth lives in the dark. We tried to forget again. Tried to keep living. A few more trips, mostly short ones. Closer to towns, official campgrounds. We never went back to unmarked roads. But even with the safe trips, there was always something under the surface. An edge in our voices, a nervous glance before we set up for the night. Jess stopped sleeping through the night. She'd wake up gasping, not screaming, just wide-eyed, breathless. Said she could hear it moving under the van, always beneath, never beside, like it was hunting through the soil itself, memorizing how we breathe. and I'd wake up soaked in sweat with the same image burned into my head, the white leg just visible behind the tree, waiting, still. It got to the point where we parked the van in my parents' driveway and stayed inside the house for weeks. Didn't even look at it, like it had become part of the story, part of the thing that followed us. I know it doesn't make sense, but that van, it had seen too much, carried too much. And somehow, I believe that the thing, whatever it was, knew that. That's when the smell came back. Not in the woods, not at a campsite, in the house. At first, it was faint. Damp socks, mildew, earth after a flood. I blamed the basement. I cleaned the vents, scrubbed everything twice. But the smell kept returning, always at night, always near the front door. One morning, I found 3 narrow scratches on the wooden threshold. Jess cried when she saw them. We had 2 choices. Run from it or face it. We chose the second. There was something in both of us. Call it stubbornness, call it instinct. But we knew that this thing wouldn't stop until it finished something. And maybe the only way to end it was to go back. To the bluff. To the place where the smell started, where the footsteps walked through stone, where the white shape waited in the trees. I spent the day prepping the van, changed the oil, checked the tires, topped off the coolant. It felt stupidly ordinary, like I was preparing for a weekend getaway instead of whatever the hell this was. Jess packed light. Just 2 flashlights, protein bars, water, her grandfather's old pocket knife. No phones, no cameras, no distractions. That night we drove south, cutting through empty roads and half-forgotten towns until the forest closed in again. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. By the time we reached the turnoff near Clear Creek, the sky had gone bruised dark. No stars. Just low cloud cover and the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world's been paused. The dirt road felt different this time. Heavier. Like the tires were sinking deeper into the earth. Like the trees had leaned in closer, listening. We parked in the same spot. The clearing hadn't changed. The fire pit was still there. The river still whispered below. And the bluff still loomed across the water, black and jagged, silhouetted against the nothing sky. But something was wrong with the air. It felt too thick, too warm, like breathing inside a sealed box. We got out of the van. Jess turned on the flashlight. I followed. We didn't speak as we made our way down to the riverbank. The stones shifted beneath our boots. The water moved slower than it should have, like it was resisting time itself. I felt the pull of it, like a current inside my chest trying to draw me forward, not physically, but emotionally. Like it knew what guilt lived in me, what fear I hadn't spoken. We stood across from the bluff, and that's when we heard it. Not a footstep, not a whisper, but a hum. Low, rhythmic, like a song without melody, like stone grinding against bone. Jess grabbed my arm hard. Her face had gone pale. I turned my head to her, but she was staring at something behind me. I turned. Across the river, halfway up the bluff, something was standing on the shelf. Not crouched, not hidden, standing, tall, slender, pale. It didn't move. It didn't wave or lurch or scream. It simply watched. Jess stepped backward. The flashlight in her hand flickered. And then, without sound, it was gone. Gone like it had never been there, but it had. Because when we looked again, the white bone on the shelf was gone too. And in its place, something new. A bundle. Wrapped in cloth, tied with vines, placed precisely in the center of the shelf like an offering or a warning. My mouth went dry, my legs locked. We didn't go back up the trail. We didn't hike to the overlook. We turned, we ran, straight to the van, slammed the doors shut, peeled out of the clearing like the whole forest was about to collapse in on itself. The fog chased us, I swear it did. It poured out of the trees like breath from a mouth. It curled around the van, clung to the windshield, turned the headlights into useless blurs. And in the distance, one last sound, like something calling our names in reverse. We didn't stop driving for hours, didn't speak, didn't blink more than we had to. I kept both hands on the wheel, knuckles bloodless, and Jess just stared dead ahead, arms folded tight, jaw clenched like she was trying not to scream. That fog followed us for miles, long after it should have cleared. Even after we hit asphalt again, it lingered behind us in the rear view, rolling and silent, like it knew we were watching and didn't care. We made it to a cheap motel outside Chillicothe just after 3 a.m., didn't even bother checking in properly. We left the van in the lot and took the first room we could get. Inside, we collapsed. Jess onto the bed, me onto the stained carpet by the door. It was hours before either of us slept. And when we did, it was worse than before. I dreamed I was in the clearing again, but it wasn't night. It was nothing, no light, no sound, no gravity, just the shape of the bluff floating in a black that wasn't sky. I stood at the edge of the river, but the water was gone. Dried up. The stones were cracked and hollow, and on the shelf in the bluff, there wasn't a bundle this time. It was me. Me, standing there, naked and pale and motionless, eyes black like burned-out stars. I woke choking, my throat raw, lungs locked like something had sat on my chest for hours. Jess was already up, staring at the TV, which wasn't even on. "I had it again," she whispered. But this time, it told me something. I asked her what. She didn't answer, just shook her head. I could feel something was different in her, like the thing hadn't just followed us, it had entered. It was inside her thoughts now, rearranging the wiring, making itself comfortable. And I felt it too. Not just fear, familiarity, like we were somehow part of it already, like we'd always been part of it, and the trip had just peeled away whatever illusion we'd been living under. We left the motel at sunrise, got coffee, ate nothing, didn't even look at the van as we got back in. And as we drove, I couldn't stop thinking about what Barry said. Not taken, invited. Why? Why us? Why then? We didn't speak again until we reached Jess's apartment in Dayton. She turned to me as I parked and said, "I need to be alone." There was no emotion in it, just a fact, like saying it was raining or cold. I nodded. She got out. I haven't seen her since. Not really. We texted a few times over the next month. She said she was okay, but her responses were short, sterile, like someone else had borrowed her phone. I started sleeping in the van again, not on purpose, just ended up there. I'd wake up some mornings in the back seat, the keys still in the ignition, headlights faintly glowing, battery drained. No memory of how I got there, no memory of dreams, but always the smell. That same earthy rot, faint but sharp in the back of my nose, and every time a new scratch. Somewhere on the body, sometimes shallow, sometimes deep, sometimes letters. Once I saw a curve scratched just beneath the license plate. Looked like a rune, or maybe a hook. I scrubbed it off, painted over the deeper ones. But they kept coming back, and worse, something was changing inside me. Not fear anymore, hunger, not for food, for return. I'd find myself pulling up Hocking Hills on the map, zooming in on satellite view, searching for that clearing. I even dreamed in topography, saw elevation lines and tree cover like they were roads leading home. It was home, wasn't it? That's what the dreams kept saying. You were born there, they whispered. You left your name behind. You need to come back to remember who you are. The first time I woke up with dirt under my fingernails, I told myself it was a dream, that I'd walked outside half asleep, but then it happened again, and again. Always on nights when the fog rolled low in the streets, when the moon was too full and the air too still, sometimes I'd find footprints outside the van. Just one. Sometimes more, but always barefoot. Always with that wrong middle toe curved just slightly to the left. And sometimes, God help me, I'd find my own shoes, wet and muddy, drying by the door I don't remember opening. That's when I stopped sleeping. Tried to stay awake with coffee, energy drinks, music. Didn't matter. I'd black out at random, wake up in the driver's seat. Mile counter changed, map open to Clear Creek, and once I swear I found a piece of vine on the passenger seat, wrapped in a loop, like a bracelet, like a gift. Something was calling me, not with words, not with voice, but with memory, or maybe hunger. I started dreaming of others too, people in the woods, blank faces, all pale, all barefoot, all standing in a ring around the bluff, facing inward, arms raised like they were praying without sound. And me? I was in the center, lying flat, heart open, eyes wide. And every time I'd wake up with that sensation, like something in my chest was waiting to be removed. Jess stopped responding to texts, her number disconnected, no forwarding info. It was like she'd been erased, or maybe taken all the way this time. Maybe she stopped resisting. Maybe she went home. I've been fighting it for months, driving in circles, avoiding the turnoff, sleeping in Walmart parking lots just to avoid trees. But it's not working. I'm changing. The dreams are getting clearer, and the last time I blacked out, I woke up on the dirt road again, just 50 feet from the clearing. The van was parked, neatly, like it always belonged there. And in the center of the fire pit, something was waiting, a bundle, wrapped in cloth, tied in vines. This time I opened it. Inside, a photo of me, sleeping, from above, and on the back, in a child's handwriting, "You came back. Let us in." I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just stood there in the clearing, photo in hand, feeling the weight of something far older than fear settle onto my shoulders. It wasn't terror anymore. It was something deeper, a recognition. Like the moment when you return to a place from your childhood, not because you remember it, but because it remembers you. I folded the photo, slipped it into the glove box without thinking. My hands were numb. My legs didn't want to move. The forest was perfectly still. No wind, no river sound, no bugs, only my own breath, ragged and slow. I sat on the edge of the fire pit, fingers digging into the cold dirt. And that's when I knew. It was never about the thing that moved in the bluffs. Not exactly. It was about the invitation, about the part of me that had already said yes long before I parked the van here. I don't remember the first time I came to this place, but I'm starting to believe it wasn't just a road trip last fall. I'm starting to believe I've been here before. Maybe as a child, maybe in a dream, maybe in some life deeper than this one. And whatever lives in the stone, whatever breathes beneath that bluff, it remembers, it waits, not to chase, not to kill, but to return what you left behind. We don't think of land as memory, we think of it as passive, dirt and stone and trees. But some places are different. Some places carry intent. The bluff is one of those places. It doesn't move, it doesn't speak, but it reaches, it chooses. It waits for your guilt, your fear, your confusion. It waits until you've lost enough pieces of yourself that you're hollow enough to hear it. That's what happened to Jess. That's what's happening to me. I started coming back more often, little by little. Told myself I was trying to understand it, to research it. I even brought a notebook, drew maps, collected stones. Like that would protect me. But the bluff doesn't want documentation, it wants devotion. I tried to fight it. Really. I tried to drive west. Booked a trip to the Rockies, packed the van, even made it halfway through Illinois. But I woke up in the van the next morning parked here again. No gas stations, no receipts, no memory, just the van, the river, the bluff, and another bundle in the fire pit. This one had no photo, just a small strip of skin, dried and pale, not bloody, not fresh, but unmistakably human. I buried it without touching it. The next night I found something else waiting, a footprint beside my sleeping bag. It wasn't barefoot. It was a boot print, the same kind Jess used to wear. I haven't told anyone this, not my parents, not my brother, not the ranger who still checks trails once a month and keeps his eyes low when he passes this area. Because what would I even say? That something followed me home? That I might be becoming it? That I might already be what I feared? This morning, I stood at the edge of the bluff for the first time, climbed the trail alone. No gear, no food, just the clothes on my back and a journal in my coat pocket. I reached the overlook and saw the shelf clearly in daylight. And there it was, a new figure. Not pale this time, not distant, just a shape, kneeling, facing inward, arms raised, wearing my shirt, wearing my face. It didn't move. It didn't need to. I sat down and wrote this story instead. I don't know what time it is now. The sun's still up, but it feels like night. The river below isn't making sound anymore. And the wind, it's breathing again, right behind me. If you're hearing this, if the story made it out, know this. Some roads don't take you places. They call you back. And if you ever feel the pull, if you ever find yourself parked near a river in Southeast Ohio, If the trees feel too still and the stone feels too warm beneath your feet, leave now. Because once you hear it, once you smell it, once you see yourself from the other side, you've already said yes. And the bluff never lets go of what's been offered. Not in this life, not in the next, not ever.